Ladies and gentlemen, if you are enjoying my videos, please click the like button. It is the only way the YouTube algorithm really notices me. I would be very grateful to you. Potapike remarked that this year's apple harvest was expected to be bountiful, a glimmer of hope amidst their hardships. The trees in the orchard were heavy with ripe, red apples, their sweet fragrance filling the air, a stark contrast to the somber mood that had settled over the village. Despite this abundance, a shadow loomed over their prosperity. The city buyers, once a reliable source of income, no longer ventured into their remote and increasingly eerie corner of the countryside. The isolation brought a growing sense of unease. The villagers whispered of the strange occurrences in the nearby woods, tales that kept the city folk at bay. Each apple picked seemed like a futile gesture against the creeping dread that had begun to infiltrate their lives. Potapike's weathered face bore a worried frown as he stood among the trees, the richness of the harvest unable to lift the heavy weight on his shoulders. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the orchard, the apples glistened under the fading light, almost mocking their predicament. The silence that enveloped the village was thick and oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves, which seemed to carry whispers of unseen entities lurking just beyond sight. The bountiful harvest, once a symbol of hope and prosperity, now felt like a cruel jest in the face of the encroaching darkness. In the growing gloom, Potapike couldn't shake off the feeling that the apples themselves were watching, waiting. Each step he took was haunted by the eerie stillness of the orchard, a silence that seemed to throb with a life of its own. He glanced back at the trees, their branches heavy with fruit, and shivered, feeling as though the harvest was not a blessing, but a harbinger of the unseen horrors that awaited them. The author vividly describes the grueling conditions of rural life, where the villagers are burdened by the relentless demands of their environment. The scorching heat of the summer sun beats down mercilessly on the small community, sapping their strength and spirit. Each day they must water their gardens by hand, a back-breaking task that leaves them exhausted and weary. The once fertile soil now seems to resist their efforts, turning the simple act of nurturing their plants into a Sisyphean struggle. The heat is oppressive, wrapping around them like a suffocating blanket. Sweat pours down their faces as they carry heavy buckets from the well, their arms trembling with the strain. The sun's unyielding glare reflects off the dry earth, blinding them and making each step feel like a journey through a desert. The garden, which should have been a source of sustenance and solace, has become a battleground where they fight daily for survival. As the days wear on, the villagers find their resilience waning. The constant need to tend to their crops, combined with the harsh elements, creates an overwhelming sense of fatigue. Their bodies ache, their minds are clouded with a sense of futility. The simple pleasure of working the land, of watching things grow, has been overshadowed by the relentless toil and the creeping dread that now permeates their lives. Every task, no matter how small, feels monumental under the weight of their exhaustion. The once clear, cheerful chatter that accompanied their work is replaced by heavy silence, punctuated only by the sounds of labored breathing and the occasional muttered curse. The garden, under the relentless sun, takes on an almost sinister quality. The plants, thirsty and struggling, seem to mock their efforts with every wilted leaf. In the oppressive heat, time stretches unbearably. Hours feel like days, and the end of their labor seems an eternity away. The villagers' faces, lined with dirt and sweat, reflect a shared sense of despair. The garden, their lifeline, has turned into a symbol of their struggle, its lush greenery now a stark reminder of the price they pay to maintain it. As the sun sets, bringing a brief respite from the heat, a cool breeze offers momentary relief. Yet the darkness that follows is filled with its own terrors. The villagers know that the night holds its own challenges, as strange and unsettling sounds emanate from the surrounding woods, reminding them that their fight for survival is far from over. The fatigue and fear combine, creating an atmosphere of tension and unease that settles over the village like a shroud, leaving them to wonder what new horrors the night will bring. The protagonists often find solace in each other's company, gathering in the cool shade of an old oak tree after a long day's work. Their conversations are a mix of grumbles and laughter, a necessary reprieve from the grueling reality of their rural existence. They share tobacco, passing around a tin as they recount the day's labors and the myriad difficulties they face, especially the unreliable transportation that has become a thorn in their sides. Their voices, though weary, carry a sense of camaraderie and mutual understanding. Each puff of shared tobacco smoke is a silent acknowledgement of their shared struggles. The conversation often turns to the battered truck that serves as their lifeline to the outside world. It's an ancient, temperamental beast that seems to break down more often than it runs. The villagers discuss in hushed tones the latest repair efforts, each offering advice and assistance where they can. Beneath the surface of their casual chatter, there is an underlying tension. The transportation woes are more than just an inconvenience, they are a reminder of their isolation, of how cut off they are from the world beyond their village. The stories of breakdowns and failed trips to town are tinged with anxiety. They know that a major failure could leave them stranded, without access to vital supplies or the ability to seek help. Despite the looming threat, their interactions are marked by a deep sense of solidarity. They swap stories, some humorous, some tinged with the macabre. There is laughter, yes, but also a shared, unspoken fear of the unknown. Their friendships are forged in the fires of hardship, each act of sharing and support a testament to their resilience. As night falls, the group disbands, each person retreating to their homes with a wave or a nod. The echoes of their conversations linger in the air, a faint comfort against the encroaching darkness. The friendly banter and shared tobacco offer a brief escape from their worries, a momentary shield against the eerie silence that falls over the village. But as they part ways, the darkness seems to swallow their camaraderie, leaving behind a cold, creeping fear. Each step home is taken with a heightened awareness, eyes darting to the shadowy edges of the forest. The tight-knit bond they share by day becomes their shield against the terrors of the night. In the safety of their homes, they cling to the warmth of their friendships, a beacon of light in the growing darkness that surrounds them. Pashka Salantiev's arrival at Potapyk's doorstep is always an event of quiet anticipation. With his rough-hewn backpack filled with goods from the distant border station, he brings a lifeline to the small, isolated community. Potapyk, living with his adopted grandson Denis, looks forward to these visits, not just for the supplies but for the brief connection to the outside world that Pashka represents. The exchange begins with a simple knock on the door. Potapyk ushers Pashka inside, the old man's eyes lighting up with a mixture of hope and curiosity. They sit at the rickety kitchen table, a ritualistic air about their meeting. Pashka opens his pack, revealing an assortment of items: a bag of flour, a few cans of preserved meat, some batteries, and most prized of all, a small stash of medicine. Their conversation is interwoven with the inventory. Potapyk's weathered hands handle each item carefully, a silent acknowledgement of their value. The goods are a lifeline, not just for him and Denis but for the whole village. In exchange, Potapyk offers Pashka a selection of apples, jars of homemade preserves, and a freshly caught fish, still glistening from the stream. The barter system is their currency, a necessary adaptation to the harsh realities of their existence. As they discuss the trade, their talk turns to the difficulties of sourcing and transporting these goods. Pashka recounts his treacherous journey, the roads increasingly hazardous, not just from disrepair, but from the lurking dangers that have started to plague their region. The woods, once a source of livelihood, have become sinister, filled with eerie noises and strange sightings. Each trip to the border is a gamble, a test of courage and endurance. The weight of their words hangs heavy in the room. Denis, playing quietly in the corner, listens with wide eyes. The child understands more than he lets on, his innocence slowly eroded by the creeping dread that has infiltrated their lives. Potapyk and Pashka speak in hushed tones, mindful of the boy, yet unable to mask the urgency and fear in their voices. Their exchange of goods is more than a simple transaction, it is an act of survival. Each item passed between them is a symbol of their resilience, their determination to endure despite the odds. The barter, once a quaint practice, has become a critical element of their daily lives, a means to navigate the uncertainties that threaten to overwhelm them. As Pashka prepares to leave, the two men share a moment of quiet camaraderie. There are no grand gestures, just a firm handshake and a mutual understanding of the challenges ahead. Pashka's visits are a lifeline, a fragile thread connecting them to a semblance of normalcy. As he steps out into the gathering dusk, Potapyk watches him go. a silent prayer for his safe return lingering in his thoughts. The door closes, and the house feels a bit emptier, the shadows a bit longer. Potapike turns back to Dennis, who looks up with questioning eyes. He forces a smile, ruffling the boy's hair, and begins to put away the supplies. Outside, the wind picks up, rustling the leaves with a whisper that seems almost sentient. The night is approaching, bringing with it the promise of new uncertainties. But for now, they have what they need to face it, thanks to the barter, thanks to Pashka's bravery. Despite their reluctance, the villagers understand that hunting is a necessity for their survival. The once abundant fields and gardens no longer provide enough to sustain them, and the forest, dense and dark, holds the promise of food. Potapike, with his grizzled face set in a determined frown, often takes his rifle and heads into the woods, a silent acknowledgement of the grim reality they face. The forest, sprawling and ancient, is filled with game. Deer, wild boar, and smaller creatures like rabbits and birds move through the underbrush, their presence both a blessing and a curse. Potapike knows the paths well, but each step into the forest feels like a venture into another world, one filled with unseen eyes and lurking dangers. Hunting is not just a task, it is a dance with the forest's many perils. The trees, gnarled and twisted, seem to whisper secrets to those brave enough to enter. The air is thick with tension, every rustle and snap of a twig a potential threat. Potapike moves with the practiced caution of someone who has learned to respect the forest's unpredictable nature. His senses are heightened, every fiber of his being tuned to the nuances of the wilderness. He is not alone in his endeavors. Other villagers, including the stoic Pashka Silentiev, also take to the woods, driven by the same desperate need. They share knowledge and tips, passing down techniques honed by years of necessity. Pashka, with his steely resolve, often ventures deeper into the forest, his eyes scanning for signs of movement, his ears attuned to the slightest sound. The hunt is fraught with challenges. The animals, once plentiful and easy to track, have grown wary, their behavior altered by the encroaching dangers. The hunters must be more cunning, their strategies more elaborate. Potapike often finds himself lying in wait for hours, his breath shallow, his fingers steady on the trigger. The thrill of the hunt is overshadowed by the stakes a missed shot could mean another night with empty bellies. But the forest holds more than just game. It is a place of growing menace, where strange sounds and eerie lights have begun to appear. The hunters whisper of encounters with unseen entities, of being watched by eyes that do not belong to any known creature. Potapike himself has felt it, a creeping dread that makes his skin prickle and his heart race. Yet he cannot afford to let fear paralyze him. Each successful hunt is a victory, each kill a means to stave off hunger for a little longer. There are moments of triumph. Potapike recalls the thrill of bringing down a wild boar, its tusks glinting in the moonlight as it charged. The adrenaline surge, the relief when the shot found its mark, and the subsequent struggle to bring the heavy carcass back to the village. Such moments are fleeting, but they fuel the hunter's resolve, a reminder that they can endure, that they can provide. Returning to the village with their haul, Potapike and Pashka are greeted with a mixture of relief and apprehension. The meat is a lifeline, but the tales of what they encountered in the forest cast a shadow over the celebration. The villagers gather around, their faces gaunt but hopeful, as the hunters distribute the spoils. Each piece of meat is a testament to their bravery, a buffer against the encroaching winter. The necessity of the hunt binds them together, a shared burden that underscores their interdependence. As they sit around the fire, preparing the meat for preservation, their conversations are hushed, their eyes reflecting the flickering flames and the unspoken fears of the forest. The act of hunting, once a simple means of sustenance, has become a grim reminder of their precarious existence. Yet, amid the fear and uncertainty, there is a steely determination. They are survivors, each hunt a reaffirmation of their will to endure. Potapike, Pashka, and the others know that as long as they can brave the forest, as long as they can bring back the game, they have a fighting chance. The darkness may press in, but their resolve burns bright, a beacon against the encroaching night. Moose and wild boar meat are highly prized commodities in the village, far more valuable than the meager crops they can coax from the stubborn soil. The hunters know that each successful hunt means not just food on the table, but also a chance to trade for essential supplies. Bullets, vodka, and diesel fuel, these are the lifelines that keep the village clinging to a semblance of normalcy. When Potapike and Pashka return from the forest with their kills, the villagers gather in tense anticipation. The sight of a gutted moose or the hefty carcass of a wild boar sparks a flurry of activity. These spoils are quickly processed, the meat carefully portioned and preserved. Potapike, with his weathered hands and deep-set eyes, oversees the operation, ensuring that nothing goes to waste. The barter system is the heartbeat of their economy. The hunters, viewed with a mix of respect and envy, are the village's providers. A slab of moose meat can be exchanged for a box of ammunition, vital for future hunts and protection against the lurking dangers of the forest. Wild boar meat, with its rich, fatty flavor, is particularly coveted. It can fetch bottles of vodka, a liquid currency that eases the harsh realities of their existence, or cans of diesel, essential for the few remaining generators and farming equipment. In these transactions, Pashka often takes the lead. His keen eye for a fair deal and his unyielding demeanor make him a formidable trader. He negotiates with the other villagers, weighing their needs against the hunter's future requirements. Each trade is a delicate balance, a game of survival where every bullet and every drop of fuel counts. The villagers, though wary, understand the necessity of these exchanges. They bring forth their offerings: homemade preserves, scavenged items, and occasionally a treasured family heirloom, all in hopes of securing a piece of the precious meat. The negotiations are somber affairs, conducted with the grim understanding that their lives depend on the outcome. The vodka, often viewed as a luxury, serves a dual purpose. It is a comfort in the face of relentless hardship and a potent antiseptic for injuries sustained in the dangerous hunts. Potapike, though not a drinker himself, understands its value. He trades shrewdly, ensuring that each bottle received is worth its weight in meat. Diesel fuel, however, is the most critical. It powers the generators that provide light during the long, dark nights and fuel for the few vehicles that still run. The generators are their bastion against the encroaching darkness, a fragile barrier that keeps the horrors of the forest at bay. The diesel's roar is a constant reminder of their tenuous grip on safety, each drop precious beyond measure. Every successful hunt and subsequent trade reinforces the hunter's roles as the village's lifeline. Potapike, with his deep knowledge of the forest, and Pashka, with his sharp mind for barter, embody the thin line between survival and despair. They return to the village not just with meat, but with the means to sustain their fragile existence. As night falls, the village gathers around their flickering fires, the shadows dancing on the walls. The meat, now safely stored and the trades made, brings a brief respite. But the knowledge that another hunt looms, that the forest will call them back, tempers their relief. Each piece of meat is a victory, each trade a step further from the brink, yet the forest remains a constant, brooding presence on the edge of their lives. In this relentless cycle, the exchange of game for supplies is more than a simple transaction. It is a lifeline, a testament to their resilience, and a grim reminder of the ever-present dangers that lurk just beyond the village's fragile perimeter. The hunters, with their grim determination, are the vanguard of their survival. Each hunt a gamble with death, each trade a brief, fleeting victory against the encroaching darkness. The forest stretching between the villages of Veshnyaki and Malaya Gorka is a dark, foreboding place. Its dense canopy of twisted branches and gnarled trees casts a perpetual twilight over the undergrowth, even at midday. This forest, once merely challenging for its rugged terrain and elusive game, has now become a place of dread and whispered tales of horror. Though teeming with deer, wild boar, and even the occasional moose, the forest's abundance is overshadowed by the ominous presence of strange creatures. These beings, known to the villagers as chudiki, or freaks, have turned the forest into a hunting ground where the hunters are just as likely to become the hunted. No one knows where these chudiki came from or what they want. They are grotesque and unnatural, moving with an eerie, unsettling grace that seems almost otherworldly. Hunters like Potapike and Pashka no longer venture into the forest alone. The days of solitary hunts, where a man could find peace in the quiet and the thrill of the chase, are over. Now, they travel in pairs or small groups, their senses heightened and nerves taut. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, is met with a quick turn of the head and the tightening grip on a weapon. The Chudiki are not like any animals the villagers have encountered before. They seem to meld into the forest, their mottled skin blending perfectly with the shadows. Their eyes, glowing faintly in the dim light, are devoid of humanity, filled only with a predatory hunger. They move silently, appearing and disappearing in the blink of an eye, leaving behind nothing but the chilling sense of being watched. Encounters with these creatures are rare but deadly. The few hunters who have returned from such meetings speak of their speed and strength, their almost supernatural ability to ambush even the most experienced woodsmen. Potapike, a seasoned hunter with a lifetime of forest lore, recalls a time when he and Pashka barely escaped with their lives. The memory of that day is etched into his mind: the sudden attack, the frantic fight, and the haunting cries of the Chudiki as they retreated into the darkness. Despite the dangers, the forest remains a vital resource. Its game is essential for the village's survival, and the hunters must brave its depths to bring back meat. Each expedition is planned with military precision. They move cautiously, communicating through hand signals and hushed whispers. Every decision, every step is calculated to minimize risk and maximize their chances of a successful hunt without falling prey to the Chudiki. The hunters' camaraderie is their greatest asset. They rely on each other, watching each other's backs and sharing their fears and strategies. This bond is forged in the crucible of shared danger, each man knowing that his life depends on the vigilance and bravery of his companions. Their conversations, often conducted in the brief moments of respite, revolve around the best ways to avoid or confront the Chudiki, their faces set in grim determination. As they delve deeper into the forest, the tension mounts. The air grows thicker, the light dimmer. The natural sounds of the forest, the calls of birds, the rustle of small animals seem muted, as if the very woods are holding their breath. The hunters move through this eerie silence, their hearts pounding in their chests, every sense alert to the slightest sign of danger. In this treacherous environment, the hunters' skills are put to the ultimate test. They track their quarry with an intensity born of necessity, knowing that any mistake could be their last. The thrill of the hunt is now intertwined with the primal fear of the unknown, each successful kill a triumph over the ever-present threat of the Chudiki. The forest between Veshnyaki and Malaya Gorka is a place where courage is tested and survival is never guaranteed. It is a realm where the natural world has twisted into something dark and perilous, where the hunters must always be on guard, their unity and skill the only shields against the terrors that lurk in the shadows. Potapike was not a man easily spooked. Years of living close to the land had taught him to read the subtle signs of nature, to sense shifts in weather and the presence of predators long before they became apparent. But lately something in the air had changed, something that unsettled even him. The sky, usually a vast canvas of blue or gray, had begun to host strange formations of clouds that twisted and coiled in ways that defied explanation. These clouds were unlike any Potapike had seen before. They moved against the wind, swirling and pulsating with an eerie, almost malevolent energy. Their colors shifted too, from a sickly green to a deep, bruised purple, casting an unnatural light over the village and the surrounding countryside. The air beneath these clouds felt heavy, charged with a static that made the hairs on the back of Potapike's neck stand up. Standing at the edge of his orchard, Potapike squinted up at the sky, his weathered face etched with concern. He had seen enough of the world's anomalies to know that these clouds were not a good omen. He called out to his grandson Denis and the others, warning them of the potential danger. His voice, usually steady and calm, carried an edge of urgency that made everyone stop and listen. "There's something wrong with those clouds," he said, pointing with a trembling finger. "Mark my words, there's trouble coming." The villagers gathered around him, their faces a mixture of curiosity and unease. They followed his gaze, squinting up at the roiling mass above. Some muttered prayers, others exchanged nervous glances. The sky, which had been an ally in their daily lives, now seemed like a harbinger of doom. As if on cue, the strange clouds began to emit a low, resonant hum. It started as a faint vibration in the ground, barely noticeable at first. But within minutes, the sound grew louder, more insistent, resonating through the earth and up into their bones. The villagers clutched at their chests, feeling the unnerving pulse deep inside them. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. It was not the violent shaking of an earthquake, but a rhythmic, almost deliberate thrum that seemed to come from deep within the earth. Objects rattled on shelves, and the leaves in the orchard trees shivered as if in fear. The animals, usually calm and docile, became agitated, their eyes wide with panic. Potapix's warning had been vindicated in the most unsettling way. The villagers looked to him for guidance, their faces pale and drawn. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "Gather your things and stay close to home," he instructed. "Keep your eyes on the sky and be ready for anything." The children were herded indoors, their wide-eyed questions hushed by worried parents. Pots and pans were hastily secured, and candles were lit in anticipation of a possible power outage. The village, usually a place of quiet industry and communal warmth, now buzzed with an undercurrent of fear. Potapike himself retreated to his small cottage, where Dinas was already busy securing windows and doors. The old man took down his hunting rifle from its place on the wall, checking it with a practiced hand. His eyes were sharp, but behind them lurked the shadow of dread. He had seen strange things before, but this felt different, more immediate. As the hum from the sky grew louder, Potapike stood at his window, the rifle at his side. He watched as the clouds above twisted and writhed, the colors deepening into a sinister black. The earth beneath him continued its steady, ominous thrum, like the heartbeat of some great, unseen beast. The night was coming, and with it, the unknown. Potapike knew they had to be ready for whatever emerged from those clouds, whatever came with the tremors. The village huddled in its homes, waiting for the next sign, the next indication of what was to come. In the gathering darkness, Potapike's words echoed in their minds, a chilling reminder that in this strange and hostile world, nothing could be taken for granted. Sensing the looming threat, Potapike's demeanor shifted from watchful to urgent. The strange clouds had now grown darker, their ominous hum resonating through the village, setting everyone on edge. Potapike's instincts, honed by years of surviving the harsh realities of rural life, screamed that something terrible was about to unfold. "Deniska, get inside the house." Now Potapike ordered, his voice firm and brooking no argument. The boy, wide-eyed with a mixture of fear and confusion, obeyed immediately, scampering toward the safety of their cottage. "Fetch the rifle," Potapike called to the narrator, who stood frozen, staring at the unnatural spectacle above. The command snapped him out of his daze. The urgency in Potapike's voice was unmistakable. Whatever was coming, it was not something they could face unprepared. The narrator rushed to the small cottage, the sturdy structure now feeling more like a fragile refuge against the unknown. Inside, Deniska was already busy closing shutters and securing the doors, his small hands trembling but determined. The narrator made his way to the back room, where Potapike's hunting rifle hung on the wall, a reliable tool from a simpler time. As he took the rifle down, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation pressing on his shoulders. This wasn't just about hunting game, this was about survival against an undefined menace. He checked the rifle with quick, practiced movements, ensuring it was loaded and ready. The cold metal felt reassuring in his hands, a tangible means of defense against the intangible fear that loomed over them. Returning to the main room, he found Potapike standing by the window, his eyes fixed on the sky. The old man's face was a mask of concentration, his mind working through years of experience to anticipate what might come next. He took the rifle from the narrator, nodding in approval at its readiness. "We need to be prepared for anything," Potapike said, his voice low but steady. "I don't know what's out there, but it's not friendly. Keep close and stay alert." The cottage was now sealed as best as they could manage. Candles flickered in the dim light, casting long, wavering shadows that danced eerily on the walls. Outside, the hum had grown louder, an insistent drone that seemed to vibrate through the very bones of the building. The air was thick with anticipation and fear, each breath feeling like a struggle. Deniska clung to Potapike's leg, his small frame shaking. The old man put a reassuring hand on the boy's head, ruffling his hair gently. "Stay strong, little one. We'll get through this." The narrator took a position near the door, his own heart pounding in his chest. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside made him flinch. The minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity as they waited, the oppressive atmosphere pressing down on them. Outside, the clouds began to pulsate with a sickly green light, casting an unnatural glow over the village. The hum was now a roar, filling their ears and making it hard to think. Potapikes tightened his grip on the rifle, his eyes narrowing in determination. "Whatever happens, we stick together," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "We protect each other, no matter what." In the eerie glow of the pulsating sky, the small family stood ready to face the unknown. The night held its breath, and with it, so did they, bracing for the storm that was about to break over their fragile world. 3 years ago, the unsettling events began, eerily mirroring the current June when the author returned for a vacation to visit family and unwind. It was supposed to be a respite, a break from the mundane routines of city life, but instead, it became entangled in a recurring cycle of disasters. The summer sun had painted the landscape in hues of gold and green as the author arrived in the village, greeted warmly by Potapike and his family. Back then, the air buzzed with anticipation of a peaceful retreat, far removed from the hustle and bustle of urban existence. Yet, beneath the surface tranquility, there lingered an unspoken tension, as if the land itself held its breath in anticipation of something ominous. The first signs were subtle, a strange stillness in the air that defied the usual rhythms of rural life, an uncanny quiet that settled over the fields and forests. Potapike, always attuned to the nuances of nature, mentioned in passing the odd behavior of wildlife, how animals seemed to sense an impending shift in the natural order. The village conversations, usually filled with mundane gossip and shared laughter, occasionally turned to whispered tales of inexplicable phenomena, a sighting of lights flickering in the distant woods, a fleeting shadow that darted across the fields at twilight. As days stretched into weeks, the atmosphere grew increasingly charged with unease. The villagers, resilient in their rural ways, carried on with their daily chores, the tending of crops, the mending of fences, the gathering of firewood, but each action seemed imbued with a quiet urgency, a silent acknowledgement that something was amiss. Then, the incidents began to escalate. Unexplained power outages plunged the village into darkness on moonless nights, leaving them vulnerable to the unknown lurking just beyond the flickering candlelight. Strange markings appeared on the trunks of ancient trees, symbols that no one could decipher but all sensed held a sinister meaning. And then, there were the whispers of figures seen at the edge of the forest, of voices carried on the wind that spoke in tongues unfamiliar to human ears. For the author, caught in the midst of this unfolding mystery, each day brought a new layer of apprehension. The familiar sights and sounds of the village now carried an undercurrent of dread, a reminder that beneath the veneer of rustic simplicity lay a world teetering on the brink of something inexplicable and terrifying. And now, as June rolled around again, history seemed to repeat itself with chilling precision. The strange events of 3 years past echoed in the current unsettling atmosphere, weaving a tapestry of fear and uncertainty that no amount of rural resilience could fully dispel. As Potapike and his family prepared once more to confront the unknown, the author couldn't shake the feeling that they were all mere players in a larger, darker drama, where the cycle of disaster and despair spun relentlessly on. The author reminisces about returning to the village to visit his father, carrying hopes of persuading him to move to the city for a change of pace. Little did he anticipate that this visit would stretch into an extended stay, marked by the onset of eerie occurrences that defied explanation. The journey back to the village was always a mix of nostalgia and a longing for simplicity, a chance to reconnect with the roots buried deep in the rural landscape. His father, a stoic figure weathered by years of toiling the land, greeted him with a mixture of pride and concern, always mindful of the fast-paced urban life his son had embraced. The initial days unfolded as expected, with the author relishing the slower rhythm of village life, the wholesome meals prepared from garden-fresh produce, and the timeless conversations shared under the vast expanse of starlit skies. Yet beneath the tranquil facade, there lurked an unsettling undercurrent, an inexplicable shift in the natural order that gradually seeped into their daily routines. It began with subtle anomalies, a sudden chill in the air during midsummer evenings, the unexplained flickering of lights that danced along the edges of their peripheral vision. His father, a man of few words but keen intuition, noted these disturbances with a furrowed brow, as if sensing an impending storm that refused to break. The turning point came swiftly, catching them both off guard. What started as isolated incidents, a peculiar sighting at the outskirts of their farmland, strange markings etched onto the ancient oak tree that had stood sentinel for generations, soon escalated into a series of inexplicable events that defied logical explanation. The author found himself drawn deeper into the enigma, torn between his desire to protect his father and his own burgeoning curiosity to unravel the mysteries that now gripped the village in a vice-like grip. Days blurred into nights as they navigated through a maze of half-truths and superstitions, seeking answers amidst whispers of spectral figures haunting the forest and echoes of voices that spoke in tongues long forgotten. In the midst of this unfolding turmoil, the author's initial plans to persuade his father to leave the tranquil solace of the village for the chaotic embrace of the city faded into insignificance. Instead, he found himself bound to the land by threads of duty, and an unspoken pact, a silent promise to stand alongside his father in the face of whatever darkness lay ahead. As June approached once more, casting its long shadows over the village, the author couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. History seemed poised to repeat itself, threading together past and present in a tapestry of fear and uncertainty. Yet, amidst the encroaching darkness, there remained a glimmer of hope, a steadfast resolve to confront the unknown, together, father and son, in a battle against forces that defied comprehension. The construction of a cell tower in the village initially stirred mixed emotions in the author. On one hand, there was anticipation of improved connectivity that could bridge the rural isolation. On the other, a subtle unease crept in, a whisper of change unsettling the familiar quietude. The arrival of the construction crew brought with it a flurry of activity, disrupting the usual tranquility of the village. Heavy machinery hummed through the fields, raising dust clouds that danced lazily in the afternoon sun. The towering structure began to take shape against the backdrop of age-old trees, its metallic silhouette a stark contrast to the rustic charm of the countryside. For the author, the sight of the looming tower symbolized progress, tinged with apprehension, a tangible reminder of the encroaching modernity upon their traditional way of life. Yet, any lingering concerns were soon overshadowed by a more unsettling development. Shortly after the completion of the tower, the construction crew inexplicably vanished without a trace. Their departure marked the beginning of a series of peculiar occurrences that cast a pall over the village. It started with whispers among the villagers, rumors of voices carried on the wind at odd hours, strange flickers of light that played tricks on the eye, and an unshakable sensation of being watched. As days stretched into weeks, the unease deepened. Local tales grew more elaborate, weaving together threads of superstition and half-remembered folklore. Some claimed to have seen shadowy figures lingering near the tower at night, their forms shifting like mist in the moonlight. Others spoke of eerie silences descending upon the fields, broken only by the rustle of leaves or the distant cry of an owl. The author, drawn into the unfolding mystery, sought answers where none seemed forthcoming. Conversations with the remaining villagers revealed a shared sense of foreboding, a collective awareness of something stirring beneath the surface of their once tranquil existence. Even the birdsong seemed muted, as if nature itself held its breath in anticipation. In the shadow of the looming tower, as summer approached with its oppressive heat, the author couldn't shake the feeling that the village had unwittingly opened a door to forces beyond their understanding. The cell tower, intended to connect them to the outside world, now stood as a sentinel amidst gathering shadows, a beacon that beckoned not only the promise of communication, but also the specter of unknown dangers lurking just beyond the edge of perception. With each passing day, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, casting long shadows over the village, the author found themselves torn between the lure of curiosity and the instinctive urge to retreat from the encroaching darkness. The construction of the tower, once a symbol of progress, now loomed over them like a silent sentinel, its presence a constant reminder of the fragility of boundaries between old and new, tradition and change, and the visible world and the unseen realms that whispered in the twilight. Local residents stumbled upon an abandoned trailer belonging to the construction crew, deepening the mystery that had begun with the disappearance of the workers. The discovery sent ripples of unease through the village, triggering a chain of events that would forever alter its quiet existence. Word of the empty trailer spread quickly among the villagers, sparking a flurry of speculation and fear. Whispers floated through the air like restless spirits, each laden with suspicion and apprehension. Some claimed to have seen strange lights flickering near the site where the trailer stood, while others swore they heard faint, otherworldly whispers carried on the wind during the darkest hours of the night. As the days passed, tension mounted in the village. It wasn't long before representatives from the construction company and even military personnel descended upon the community, their presence both reassuring and unsettling. They combed through the area with meticulous precision, questioning villagers and conducting searches that turned up little more than unanswered questions and lingering dread. Rumors blossomed like wildflowers in the fields, weaving tales of government experiments gone awry, clandestine operations beneath the guise of progress, and spectral entities haunting the edges of perception. The once tranquil hamlet found itself ensnared in a web of uncertainty, where every shadow seemed to harbor secrets, and every whispered conversation carried the weight of unspoken fears. For the author, who had returned seeking solace in the familiarity of home, the unfolding drama represented a stark departure from the idyllic retreat they had once known. Conversations with longtime acquaintances revealed a community divided between those who clung to rational explanations rooted in logic and those who embraced the eerie whispers of supernatural intervention. Amidst the chaos, the author couldn't help but feel a creeping sense of unease, a gnawing suspicion that the answers lay buried beneath layers of official statements and carefully crafted narratives. The presence of military personnel, with their stoic demeanor and cryptic responses, only fueled the growing paranoia that something sinister lurked beneath the surface of their once peaceful surroundings. As summer wore on, casting long shadows over the village and painting the landscape in hues of amber and gold, the author found themselves caught between a yearning for truth and a deep-seated fear of what lurked in the shadows. The disappearance of the construction crew, marked by the haunting presence of their abandoned trailer, stood as a stark reminder that some mysteries defy explanation and that, perhaps, the greatest horrors are those that remain unseen, lurking just beyond the edges of understanding. At night, when the construction crew vanished without a trace, eerie tales began to circulate among the villagers. Some claimed to have heard distant rumblings and ominous crashes emanating from the depths of the decaying forest. Initially skeptical, the author dismissed these accounts as the product of overactive imaginations fueled by the unsettling disappearance. Yet, as the days unfolded, a creeping sense of unease settled over the village like a shroud. It wasn't just the rumors of strange noises echoing through the night that unsettled the author, but the tangible shift in the atmosphere itself. The once familiar paths that led out of the village seemed to twist and turn unpredictably, confounding attempts to leave. Residents who had ventured into the forest at dusk spoke of an oppressive stillness that hung heavy in the air, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the unsettling cry of a distant creature. Shadows danced in the periphery of vision, hinting at shapes that defied easy explanation. The author, drawn inexorably into the heart of the mystery, began to feel a growing sense of isolation, as if the village had become a solitary island adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Attempts to contact the outside world met with frustrating silence or cryptic responses. Phone calls that once connected seamlessly now dissolved into static-filled echoes, leaving unanswered questions lingering in the air. Each day seemed to blur into the next, marked by a relentless cycle of unanswered inquiries and mounting anxiety. As the grip of fear tightened its hold on the village, the author found themselves confronting the unsettling realization that leaving had indeed become impossible. Roads that had once led to neighboring towns now twisted and turned upon themselves, leading back to the village as if guided by unseen hands. The forest, once a source of solace and sustenance, now loomed ominously, its depths concealing secrets that whispered of ancient forces at play. In the silence of the night, when the veil between reality and nightmare grew thin, the author could no longer deny the palpable sense of foreboding that permeated every corner of their existence. The disappearance of the construction crew was no longer an isolated incident, but a harbinger of deeper, darker truths lurking just beyond the edge of perception. The author's world had become a labyrinth of uncertainty, where reality blurred with myth, and every shadow held the promise or threat of revelation. As the village grappled with its newfound isolation, the author realized with chilling clarity that they were not merely witnesses to a story of strange events, but unwilling participants in a tale where the boundaries between fear and reality had all but dissolved. Anticipating the unpredictable events that lay ahead, Potapike busied himself preparing dinner and tea, a ritual that offered some semblance of normalcy amidst the mounting unease. The author, meanwhile, strapped the rifle across their shoulder, a weighty reminder of the impending night vigil they were about to undertake. Each clink of metal against wood echoed with a foreboding resonance in the dimming twilight. The air outside seemed to thicken with an unnatural heaviness as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched like skeletal fingers across the ground. Birds, normally chirping their evening songs, fell silent, their absence amplifying the eerie stillness that settled over the village. Inside Potapike's humble abode, the glow of a flickering oil lamp cast dancing shadows on the walls, weaving tales of their own in the corners of the room. The smell of freshly brewed tea mingled with the earthy aroma of the forest that seeped through the cracks in the wooden walls, a comforting contrast to the gathering darkness outside. The author's grip tightened around the cool metal of the rifle, a stark contrast to the warmth emanating from the cup of tea, now held in their other hand. It was a small comfort, a fleeting reassurance against the unknown that lurked just beyond the threshold of the door. As the sky deepened into an inky blackness punctuated only by the occasional glimmer of stars, the village seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. The rustling of leaves outside took on a sinister quality, every snap of a twig underfoot echoing like a gunshot in the stillness. With a nod exchanged between Potapike and the author, a silent acknowledgement of shared vigilance, they braced themselves for the long night ahead. The ritual of preparing for the night was not merely a routine, but a solemn acknowledgement of the looming threat that had woven itself into the fabric of their existence. With every sip of tea and every fleeting moment of calm, the tension mounted like a coiled spring ready to snap. They knew, deep down, that this night would not be like any other. It would be a test of endurance, of courage, and of the fragile boundaries that separated the known from the unknowable. In the flickering light of the oil lamp, shadows danced on the walls, casting fleeting illusions that played tricks on the mind. Outside, the forest whispered secrets that only the brave or the foolish dared to decipher. And as the night wore on, each passing hour brought them closer to the truth they both feared and sought in equal measure. As the days wore on, the author and their neighbors gradually came to grips with the gravity of the situation unfolding around them. It was not just the disappearance of the construction crew or the ominous noises echoing from the decaying forest that unsettled them, but the sudden arrival of military personnel who cordoned off their village and the surrounding woods. The once familiar paths and clearings now bristled with tension, guarded by soldiers whose presence spoke volumes of unseen threats lurking beyond the tree line. Rumors spread like wildfire among the villagers, theories ranging from clandestine experiments to extraterrestrial encounters, each whispered in hushed tones over hastily shared meals or by the dim glow of oil lamps. The isolation imposed by the military felt like a suffocating shroud, tightening with each passing day. It wasn't just physical barriers they faced, but a psychological siege of uncertainty and fear that seeped into every conversation and every cautious glance exchanged among the villagers. For the author, accustomed to the rhythms of rural life and the reassuring familiarity of community, this sudden upheaval shattered their sense of security. The ordinary routines of gathering firewood or tending to crops now carried an undercurrent of apprehension, as if every rustle in the underbrush or distant whisper of wind carried a hidden message waiting to be deciphered. Potapike, usually a bastion of resilience in times of hardship, appeared increasingly burdened by the weight of unspoken fears. His weathered face, illuminated by the flickering light of an oil lamp during their evening discussions, betrayed moments of doubt that mirrored those creeping into the hearts of the villagers. As night fell, the village seemed to hold its breath, enveloped in an eerie silence broken only by the occasional snap of a twig or the distant murmur of soldiers on patrol. The encroaching darkness cast long shadows that stretched like accusing fingers, obscuring familiar landmarks and casting doubt on the safety of once beloved paths. The author and their neighbors huddled together in makeshift gatherings, attempting to piece together fragments of information gleaned from fleeting encounters with the outside world, Yet each revelation only deepened the mystery, weaving a tangled web of speculation and half-truths that threatened to engulf them all. In this atmosphere of uncertainty and isolation, every sunrise brought with it a renewed sense of dread, another day spent teetering on the precipice between the known and the inexplicable. And as the village remained ensnared in the grip of forces beyond their understanding, the author couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that they were merely pawns in a larger, more insidious game, a game where the rules were written in shadows and whispered secrets, and where the stakes were nothing less than their very way of life. In the heart of the dense forest that had long been a source of sustenance and mystery for the villagers, a new phenomenon emerged: strange figures clad in peculiar suits that gleamed with an otherworldly sheen. The villagers, caught between awe and trepidation, dubbed them cosmonauts, likening their appearance to beings from beyond the stars. These cosmonauts arrived silently, their movements deliberate and methodical as they set about conducting enigmatic surveys and experiments. Their presence alone sparked a flurry of rumors and conjectures among the villagers, whispered urgently during whispered conversations over crackling fires or shared over hastily brewed cups of tea. Potapike, ever the voice of reason in times of uncertainty, ventured deeper into the forest on one occasion, determined to uncover the truth behind these mysterious visitors. What he discovered only fueled the growing unease among the villagers, a clearing marked with cryptic symbols etched into the earth, strange devices emitting soft hums that seemed to resonate with an unearthly energy. The cosmonauts remained elusive, their intentions obscured by their inscrutable actions and the language barrier that separated them from the villagers. Some speculated they were emissaries from a distant world, sent to observe and study humanity in its most primal habitat. Others whispered of government experiments gone awry, casting shadows of conspiracy over the once tranquil landscape. As days turned into weeks, the presence of the cosmonauts became an unsettling fixture in the villagers' daily lives. Their encounters, fleeting and enigmatic, left behind a palpable sense of intrusion, an intrusion not only into the physical realm of the forest, but into the very fabric of the villagers' beliefs and perceptions. Nights grew longer and more restless, punctuated by distant lights flickering through the canopy and the eerie glow of devices left behind by the mysterious visitors. Sleep became a luxury for some, haunted by visions of shadowy figures moving silently among the trees or the distant echo of unfamiliar voices drifting on the wind. For the author, who had once sought solace in the simplicity of rural life, the arrival of the cosmonauts shattered the fragile illusion of safety and familiarity. Every rustle in the underbrush, every flicker of movement beyond the village perimeter, now carried a weight of uncertainty, a reminder that the boundaries between the known and the unknown were far more permeable than they had ever imagined. And as the villagers struggled to reconcile their traditional way of life with the encroaching presence of beings whose origins defied explanation, the forest itself seemed to hold its breath, poised on the brink of revelation or upheaval. In this liminal space between worlds, where reality blurred and myth bled into truth, the author found themselves grappling with questions that stretched far beyond the confines of their once peaceful village, a village now teetering on the edge of an abyss. Its fate entwined with that of the enigmatic cosmonauts who had come to inhabit its darkest corners. Rumors, like tendrils of fog on a moonless night, crept insidiously through the village after the disappearance of the installation crew. Whispers carried on hesitant breaths spoke of deeds far more ominous than mere telecommunications infrastructure. The missing workers, it was said, had delved into something beyond their mandate, something that now threatened to cast a shadow over the entire fate of the village. At first, the gossip was hushed, exchanged furtively over fences and in dimly lit kitchens where the warmth of the stove failed to dispel the chill in the air. As days turned into weeks without any sign of the crew or a plausible explanation for their vanishing, the whispers grew louder, bolder, fueled by the mounting unease that permeated every corner of the village. Potapike, always the voice of caution, recounted tales of previous incidents where outsiders had meddled in affairs best left undisturbed. His weathered face, etched with lines of wisdom earned through decades of living close to the land, now bore a furrowed brow and eyes that darted warily at shadows that seemed to grow longer with each passing twilight. The villagers, once bound by the rhythms of sowing and reaping, now found themselves ensnared in a web of uncertainty spun from conjecture and fear. What had the installation crew stumbled upon in the depths of the forest? Was it an ancient burial ground disturbed by unwitting hands, or something more sinister, a relic of forgotten times now awakened by modern intrusions? Nights became restless as imaginations ran wild, weaving narratives of spectral apparitions and vengeful spirits unleashed by the intrusion of outsiders. Sleep eluded many, haunted by dreams of faceless figures moving through mist-shrouded groves, or the distant echo of voices pleading for mercy that would never come. The village, once a sanctuary from the complexities of the world beyond, now echoed with the anxious murmurings of its inhabitants, each voice a thread in the tapestry of communal dread. Every rustle of leaves in the wind, every flicker of movement at the edge of lantern light, fed into the collective paranoia that had taken root like a weed in fertile soil. As days stretched into months, the line between rumor and reality blurred, merging into a narrative where the fate of the village hung precariously in the balance. The missing crew, now mythologized as unwitting catalysts in a darker tale, symbolized the fragility of boundaries between progress and preservation, curiosity and caution, life and a looming, intangible threat. And amid the rising tide of uncertainty, the author found themselves grappling not just with the enigma of the vanished workers, but with deeper questions that gnawed at the very core of their existence. What lay hidden in the heart of the forest, and could the secrets unearthed by those who dared to trespass now seal the village's fate in a pact with forces beyond their understanding? Pashka's shot echoed through the dense woods, shattering the usual tranquility of the village with a sudden, unsettling alertness. He emerged from the depths of the forest, dragging a strange, otherworldly creature by its thick fur, its eyes wide with an eerie luminance that sent shivers down the spines of the villagers. The Chudik, as they came to be known, resembled no creature native to those parts, a grotesque fusion of sinew and scale, with limbs that moved in uncanny, disjointed rhythms. Its presence ignited a palpable unease among the villagers, who gathered in anxious clusters to inspect the creature with a mix of awe and apprehension. Word spread swiftly, carried on whispers that hinted at the Chudik's origins, tales of ancient curses and forbidden rituals performed under moonless skies. Potapike, his weathered face set in lines of solemn caution, warned of the dangers inherent in meddling with such entities, invoking memories of bygone tragedies whispered through generations. Yet, amidst the fear that coiled like mist around the village, another force stirred. The military presence, once a distant safeguard against external threats, now offered a curious proposition. They promised rewards, a bounty of provisions scarce in the isolated village for any Chudik brought forth for examination and study. The promise of reward ignited a fervor among the hunters, their resolve hardened by the allure of scarce commodities, bullets, vodka, even fuel to power the aging generators that hummed sporadically in the village's heart. Soon the woods echoed with the crack of rifles and the triumphant shouts of those who claimed their prizes, each Chudik a testament to the escalating tension between survival and superstition. As the creatures were brought to the military outpost, the atmosphere in the village shifted. Skepticism warred with desperation as the military scrutinized the captured Chudiks, their uniforms a stark contrast against the backdrop of ancient trees that seemed to whisper secrets to those who dared listen. With each reward claimed, the villagers found themselves entangled deeper in a cycle where the line between predator and prey blurred with each rising moon. The Chudiks, once feared as harbingers of doom, now symbolized opportunity, a commodity to be traded, a source of sustenance in a world where uncertainty loomed like a specter in the fog. And amid the shifting currents of fear and fascination, the author found themselves drawn into a narrative where the threads of tradition and modernity intertwined. Each Chudik a haunting reminder that the borders between reality and myth were as fragile as the flickering light of a dying lantern in the encroaching darkness. Night in the village had always brought with it a blanket of stillness, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustle of leaves in the wind. But recently, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a sinister atmosphere took hold, transforming the familiar into something far more menacing. Strange glowing orbs began to float through the forest, casting an eerie light that danced among the trees. The ground often trembled with a deep, resonant hum, as if the earth itself was responding to some ancient, unknown call. It was during one such unsettling night that a small, disheveled figure stumbled into the village, his wide eyes reflecting both fear and exhaustion. The boy, no older than 10, was dirty and trembling, clutching his arms around his frail body as if to ward off an invisible chill. The villagers, already on edge from the night's bizarre phenomena, gathered around him, their curiosity mixed with a creeping dread. This was Dinis, a child who had gone missing in the forest days earlier. His parents, too, had vanished, leaving behind only whispers and unanswered questions. As the villagers questioned him, Dennis's story unfolded in fits and starts, his voice barely more than a whisper. He spoke of getting separated from his parents as they fled from strange lights and unearthly sounds. He wandered alone, disoriented by the incessant hum that seemed to come from all directions. His tale was punctuated by glimpses of shadowy figures that moved through the woods, figures that seemed neither entirely human nor entirely beast. The boy's eyes darted nervously as he recounted his encounter with these beings, his words faltering when he tried to describe them. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances, their own fears reflected in the child's haunted gaze. As Dinis continued, he revealed that he had seen his parents one last time, their faces pale and terrified as they were surrounded by the glowing orbs. They had tried to protect him, urging him to run, but the forest seemed to conspire against them. Paths that once led home now twisted into a confusing maze. The ground beneath him had shaken with increasing intensity, making each step a struggle. The villagers listened, spellbound and horrified, as the boy's account painted a picture of the forest as a living entity, a place where reality bent and twisted, and where ancient forces were awakening. Potapike, his face lined with worry, took Dinis under his wing, promising to keep him safe. The old man's stern exterior softened momentarily as he looked at the frightened child, a reminder of the humanity that still persisted amidst the growing terror. That night, as Potapike prepared a meager meal and tea for Dinis, the author stood guard with his rifle, eyes scanning the dark edges of the village. The strange lights flickered in the distance, and the ground shivered occasionally, a silent promise of more horrors to come. The village was now a place where the line between reality and nightmare had blurred, and where every shadow held the potential for menace. In this new, twisted reality, the arrival of Dinis was both a grim reminder of the past and a harbinger of further mysteries. The villagers, bound by their shared fear and the need for survival, braced themselves for whatever the night would bring, knowing that the true horror lay not just in the Chudiks or the military presence, but in the unknown forces that seemed to be reclaiming the land. As night fell over the village, the familiar sounds of the forest were replaced by an unsettling silence. It was a stillness that felt oppressive, as if the very air was waiting for something to happen. Then, from the direction of the rotting woods, a strange phenomenon began to unfold. A pulsating, misty cloud materialized above the treetops, its edges shimmering with an eerie light. The cloud seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in a slow, rhythmic pattern, casting a ghostly glow over the landscape. As the villagers watched in horrified fascination, a new sound emerged, faint at first but growing steadily louder. It was a deep, throbbing buzz, reminiscent of a swarm of insects. The noise seemed to come from everywhere at once, filling the air with a menacing drone. The buzzing grew in intensity, vibrating through the ground and into the bones of those who stood nearby, creating a sensation like thousands of tiny legs crawling over their skin. The villagers exchanged fearful glances, their unease mounting with each passing second. The buzzing was not just a sound, it was a physical presence, seeping into their minds and bodies, making it impossible to think clearly. Potapike, his face set in a grim mask of determination, stood at the edge of the village with his rifle, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Dinis clung to the author's side, his small body trembling with fear. The boy's wide eyes reflected the pulsating light of the cloud, his face pale and drawn. The author could feel the boy's fear mingling with his own, the sensation of crawling insects growing more intense with each heartbeat. As the cloud pulsated and the buzzing reached a fever pitch, strange shadows began to move within the mist. They were indistinct at first, mere flickers of darkness against the light, but slowly they took on more defined shapes. The villagers could make out twisted forms that seemed to writhe and contort, their movements unnatural and disturbing. A sense of dread settled over the village, a heavy weight pressing down on their hearts. The buzzing was now so loud that it drowned out all other sounds, a deafening cacophony that threatened to drive them mad. Some villagers clapped their hands over their ears, trying to block out the noise, but it was futile. The buzzing seemed to be inside their heads, a relentless drone that gnawed at their sanity. Potapike motioned for everyone to retreat to their homes, his voice barely audible over the din. The villagers hurried to comply, casting fearful glances back at the pulsating cloud and the shifting shadows within. The author, still gripping his rifle tightly, herded Dinis towards Potapike's house, the boy's small hand clutching his arm with a desperate strength. Inside the relative safety of the house, the buzzing was somewhat muted, but the sense of unease remained. The author and Potapike exchanged grim looks, knowing that whatever was happening in the forest was far from over. The pulsating cloud and its accompanying buzz were just the beginning, a harbinger of more terrifying events to come. Dinis curled up in a corner, his eyes wide with fear. Potapike moved to sit beside him, offering what comfort he could. The author stood by the window, watching the pulsating light in the distance, the rifle still clutched in his hands. The night stretched on, each minute dragging by an agonizing slowness, the buzz continuing to fill the air with its relentless, maddening hum. As the village lay in uneasy silence, the pulsating cloud loomed over the forest, its presence a constant reminder of the growing danger. The author knew that they were all trapped in a nightmare from which there was no easy escape, and that the true horror was yet to reveal itself. The oppressive buzzing reached a crescendo, vibrating through the walls and floorboards of the house. The author, Potapike, and Dinis could feel it in their bones, a relentless assault on their senses. Then, as if emerging from the very sound itself, a glowing orb began to take shape in the middle of the room. It was about the size of a soccer ball, radiating a cold, bluish light that cast eerie shadows on the walls. Potapike's eyes widened in terror. Without a word, he grabbed Dinis and pulled him under the wooden table. The boy's small frame trembled with fear, and Potapike's normally stoic face was twisted in a mask of dread. The old man began to mutter prayers under his breath, his voice shaking. The sight of the usually unflappable Potapike reduced to such a state of fear sent a chill down the author's spine. The glowing sphere floated silently, pulsing in time with the still audible buzzing. Its light seemed to intensify with each pulse, bathing the room in an otherworldly glow. The author felt a primal fear grip his heart, his mind struggling to comprehend the sight before him. He had heard the villagers' tales of strange lights and eerie sounds, but witnessing it firsthand was a different matter entirely. The sphere drifted slowly, almost lazily, as if it were searching for something. Its glow illuminated the room, casting long, flickering shadows. The author could see the fear in Dinis's eyes as he clung to Potapike. The boy's usually bright and curious gaze was now filled with sheer terror, reflecting the unnatural light of the orb. Potapike's prayers grew louder, his voice gaining a desperate edge. He was invoking every saint and deity he could think of, his hands clutching a small, worn cross that he had pulled from his pocket. Dinis mirrored his movements, though his words were barely more than whispers, a child's imitation of the old man's fervent plea for protection. The author felt rooted to the spot, his muscles locked in place by fear. He watched as the orb continued its slow, deliberate path around the room, casting its light over every surface. The buzzing was now a physical presence, pressing against his ears and making it hard to think. The sensation of crawling insects returned, stronger than ever, as if tiny legs were skittering over his skin. The sphere's light began to focus on the table where Potapike and Dinis were hiding. The old man's prayers reached a fevered pitch, his voice breaking as he implored whatever higher powers might be listening to protect them from the malevolent entity in their midst. Dinis squeezed his eyes shut, his small hands clutching Potapike's arm with a grip born of pure terror. As the sphere hovered closer, the author could feel a strange, almost magnetic pull emanating from it. It was as if the orb was drawing out their fear, feeding on it, growing brighter and more intense with each passing moment. The light became blinding, forcing the author to shield his eyes, his heart pounding in his chest. Just when it seemed the sphere would engulf them in its eerie glow, it suddenly flickered and began to fade. The buzzing receded, and the oppressive pressure in the room lifted. The light dimmed, and the sphere slowly dissolved into nothingness, leaving behind only the lingering fear and the faint echo of its buzzing drone. Potapike and Dinas remained huddled under the table, the old man's prayers tapering off into a stunned silence. The author finally allowed himself to breathe, his heart still racing. The room was dark and silent once more, but the memory of the glowing orb and the fear it brought would not be easily forgotten. As they emerged from their hiding place, the author knew that this encounter was just a glimpse of the horrors that lay ahead. The strange events plaguing the village were far from over, and the true nature of the glowing spheres and the buzzing sound remained a terrifying mystery. At first, the glowing orbs were not considered particularly dangerous. They were certainly eerie, casting their ghostly blue light and filling the air with that unsettling buzz, but they seemed more like a strange phenomenon than an immediate threat. This perception changed dramatically after the incident with Kolya. Kolya was a sturdy, no-nonsense man, well liked by the villagers for his practical approach to life and his unshakable calm in the face of adversity. One evening, he returned from the forest with a tale of having seen one of the glowing orbs up close. He described it as mesmerizing, almost beautiful in its own strange way, and admitted that he had been unable to look away from it. That night, Kolya's fate changed forever. It started as a typical evening in the village, with the usual chores and quiet conversations. The author, Potapike, and a few other villagers were sitting around a small fire, sharing stories and discussing the day's events. Suddenly, the familiar but still unsettling buzz filled the air. They looked up to see one of the glowing spheres hovering just beyond the tree line, its light piercing the darkness. Kolya stood transfixed, his eyes locked onto the orb. The villagers called out to him, urging him to look away, but he seemed not to hear them. His body stiffened, and his eyes widened as if he were in a trance. The orb began to move slowly towards him, its light growing brighter and more intense. Potapike shouted at Kolya, trying to break him out of his stupor, but it was too late. The orb's light enveloped him, and the buzzing grew louder, almost deafening. Kolya's body started to lift off the ground, as if pulled by an invisible force. He hung suspended in the air, his arms and legs splayed out, his face a mask of terror. Then, in a horrifying display, Kolya's body began to contort. His limbs twisted at unnatural angles, and his torso seemed to compress and elongate simultaneously. The villagers watched in helpless horror as Kolya's form was distorted, drawn closer and closer to the glowing sphere. His screams of agony echoed through the night, but there was nothing they could do to help him. In a final, sickening moment, Kolya was pulled into the orb. His body seemed to dissolve into the light, compressed and folded into itself, until he was completely absorbed by the sphere. The glowing orb pulsed once, twice, then shot upwards into the sky, disappearing from sight, and leaving only a chilling silence in its wake. The villagers stood in stunned disbelief. Kolya, a man they had known and worked alongside for years, was gone without a trace. The reality of the glowing orb's danger sank in deeply. These were not just strange lights, they were something far more sinister and malevolent. Word of Kolya's fate spread quickly. The villagers became vigilant, warning each other about the orbs and the deadly allure of their light. The buzzing sound that preceded their appearance now triggered an immediate sense of dread and urgency. People began to fortify their homes, closing shutters and drawing curtains as night fell, doing whatever they could to avoid the orb's deadly gaze. The fear of the glowing orbs and their fatal attraction cast a dark shadow over the village. Each night brought the possibility of another encounter, another life taken by the eerie, pulsing light. The mystery of the orbs deepened, their presence a constant reminder that the village was no longer a safe place. 2 days after Kolya's horrifying encounter with the glowing orb, the village was still reeling. The image of his body being twisted and absorbed by the eerie light haunted everyone's minds. They had barely begun to process the terror of what they had witnessed when something even more unsettling occurred. It was late afternoon when Kolya returned. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the village. Most of the villagers were indoors, trying to keep themselves busy and distract their thoughts from the recent events. A soft knock at the door of Potapike's house interrupted the quiet. Potapike, along with the author and little Dinas, who had sought refuge with them, exchanged wary glances before Potapike went to answer. Standing on the doorstep was Kolya, or at least something that looked like Kolya. His clothes were the same, though tattered and dirt-stained, but his eyes held an unnatural, vacant expression. The light in his eyes, the spark of life that had always defined him, was gone. Instead, they were dark, empty, like the eyes of a dead fish. Kolya Potapike's voice wavered, filled with a mixture of hope and dread. Kolya did not respond. He stood there, swaying slightly, as if unsure of his own body. His skin was pallid, almost translucent, and an unsettling hum emanated from him, reminiscent of the buzzing the villagers had come to associate with the orbs. Potapike stepped back, allowing Kolya to enter. The author felt a shiver run down his spine. Something was profoundly wrong. Kolya moved with a jerky, disjointed gait, like a marionette controlled by an inexperienced puppeteer. He made his way to the center of the room and stood there, silent and motionless. The tension in the room was palpable. Potapike tried again to reach Kolya, speaking gently, asking him what had happened, where he had been. But Kolya remained unresponsive, staring blankly ahead. It was as if he couldn't hear or understand them. As the night deepened, the hum around Kolya grew louder, more intense. Dinas clung to the author, his small frame trembling with fear. Potapike suggested they keep an eye on Kolya through the night, not daring to leave him alone. They took turns watching him, the hours dragging by in a relentless crawl. In the early hours of the morning, Kolya's behavior changed. He began to mutter incoherently, his voice a low, guttural rasp. His words were fragmented, disjointed, like a broken radio transmission. The few phrases they could make out were chilling in their implications. Light, draws, pain, not me. Potapike tried to comfort him, but Kolya recoiled, his face contorting in what looked like pain. He backed into a corner, clutching his head, his muttering escalating into a frenzied babble. The author and Potapike exchanged helpless glances, unsure of what to do. Suddenly, Kolya's body convulsed violently. He screamed, a sound filled with such anguish and terror that it seemed to pierce the very soul. His form twisted again, much like it had the night he was taken, but this time it was happening right before their eyes. His limbs bent and contorted, his flesh seeming to ripple and distort. In a final, horrific moment, Kolya's body seemed to implode, collapsing in on itself with a sickening crunch. Where he had stood, there was now only a dark, oozing mass, the remnants of his human form, barely recognizable. The hum that had surrounded him faded into an eerie silence. The villagers who had gathered outside rushed in, drawn by the noise. They recoiled in horror at the sight. Kolya, or whatever had returned in his place, was no more. The event confirmed their deepest fears. The glowing orbs were not just strange anomalies. They were harbingers of something far more sinister, capable of transforming and destroying life in ways they couldn't comprehend. The return of Kolya and his subsequent transformation plunged the village into a deeper state of fear and paranoia. The once tight-knit community now lived in constant dread, knowing that the orbs were not just a passive threat, but an active and deadly force. The realization that anyone who encountered these lights might never truly return as themselves left a scar on the village's collective psyche, a reminder that the peace and safety of their home were now irrevocably lost. Potapike, with a somber expression, leaned back in his chair and sighed deeply. The dim light from the single flickering candle cast long, eerie shadows across the room. Dinas sat quietly beside him, eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. The author listened intently, sensing that Potapike was about to share something of great significance. The rotten forest, Potapike began, his voice heavy with the weight of old memories, has always been a place of mystery and danger. Long before the orbs appeared, long before the military set foot in our village, there were tales of strange happenings within those woods. He paused, taking a sip of his tea, which had long gone cold. My grandfather used to tell me stories when I was just a boy. He said that the forest was cursed, a place where the spirits of the lost roamed freely. People would venture in and never return. Livestock would vanish without a trace. At night you could hear whispers on the wind and see lights that danced among the trees. Everyone knew to avoid the forest after dark. The author shivered involuntarily, the room seeming to grow colder with each word Potapike spoke. He could almost hear the whispers of the past mingling with the present, a ghostly chorus of warnings. For a time we thought these were just old wives' tales, Potapike continued. But then the events of the past few years began to unfold, and we realized that the legends were more than just stories. They were warnings, passed down through generations. The orbs, the missing people, the strange figures in the woods, they are all part of something much older and far more dangerous than we ever imagined. Dinis, his voice barely above a whisper, asked, "Do you think the military knows about the legends?" Potapike nodded slowly. "I believe they do. Why else would they be so interested in our village, in this forest? Their presence here isn't a coincidence. They've been conducting experiments, searching for something, and whatever it is, it's connected to the old stories." The author couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of discovering something terrible, something that had been buried for centuries. "What about the strange figures?" he asked. "The ones in the suits, the astronauts we've seen. Are they part of this too?" Potapike's eyes darkened. "Those figures are not of this world, or if they are, they've been changed by whatever haunts the forest. They come and go, appearing without warning. I believe they are drawn to the same phenomena that caught the military's attention. And now, with their presence, the danger has become even more real." As the night wore on, the stories of the past blended seamlessly with the horrors of the present. The villagers, huddled together in their homes, shared whispered fears and remembered the old legends. The rotten forest, once a place of dark fables, had now become a living nightmare. The strange figures, the military, the glowing orbs, all were threads in a web of mystery and dread that ensnared the entire village. Potapike's final words before they retired for the night echoed in the author's mind. "The forest has always been hungry, always seeking to claim those who wander too close. And now it has found new ways to reach us, to pull us into its depths. We must be vigilant, for the danger is not just in the forest, but all around us. The legends are not merely tales, they are a warning, and we would do well to heed them." As they settled in for a restless night, the author couldn't help but feel that the true horror was yet to come. The forest, with its ancient secrets and new terrors, was waiting. And the village, isolated and surrounded by darkness, stood on the precipice of a fate far worse than any legend could describe. The night was thick with an unsettling quiet, broken only by the distant hum of the forest and the occasional rustle of leaves. The dim candlelight cast eerie shadows that danced across the walls of Potapike's small, rustic home. The author, seated at the table, kept a wary eye on the window, half expecting the darkness outside to come alive. Suddenly, a frantic knock echoed through the room, causing everyone to jump. Dinis clutched at Potapike's sleeve, his eyes wide with fear. Potapike stood up slowly, his face stern and cautious. "Stay here," he whispered, moving towards the door with the slow deliberation of someone who had faced many dangers in his time. The knocking continued, more urgent now. Potapike opened the door a crack, just enough to peer outside. The sight of Pashka standing there, breathless and wild-eyed, was a shock. Pashka, known for his calm and sturdy demeanor, now looked like a man who had seen the depths of hell. "Potapike, let me in. For God's sake," Pashka gasped, casting anxious glances over his shoulder into the oppressive darkness of the night. Potapike hesitated for a heartbeat, suspicion warring with concern in his eyes. The stories of people changed by the forest's dark influence were fresh in his mind. But something in Pashka's desperate tone made him relent. He stepped aside and allowed Pashka to stumble into the house, quickly shutting the door and bolting it behind him. Inside, the tension was palpable. Dinis watched Pashka with a mixture of fear and curiosity, while the author remained ready, the weight of the rifle a comforting presence. "What happened?" Potapike demanded, his voice low but urgent. Pashka took a moment to catch his breath, his eyes darting around the room as if expecting something to burst through the walls at any moment. "I was out near the edge of the rotten forest," he began, his voice shaking. "I saw things, lights and figures moving in the trees. I couldn't tell if they were the astronauts or something else. I felt like I was being watched, hunted." The author leaned forward, his mind racing. "Did you see any of the orbs?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Pashka nodded, his face pale. One of them appeared, hovering just above the ground. It was like it was searching for something. I couldn't stay out there. I ran, and the whole time, I felt like it was following me. I didn't know where else to go. Potapike exchanged a grim look with the author. The presence of the orbs was a bad omen, especially so close to the village. You did the right thing coming here, Potapike said finally, though the tension in his voice was unmistakable. Dinis, sensing the gravity of the situation, asked quietly, "Are we safe here, Grandpa?" Potapike placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder, though his eyes remained shadowed with doubt. "We are together, and that counts for something," he said. "We will keep watch through the night." The author nodded, gripping his rifle more tightly. "We need to be prepared for anything. The forest, the orbs, the figures we don't know what we're dealing with." As the night wore on, the house became a fortress of fragile hope against the unknown horrors lurking outside. Pashka's arrival had reminded them all of the dangers they faced and the thin line between safety and disaster. The forest's malevolent presence felt closer than ever, its ancient hunger pressing in from all sides. Potapike stoked the fire, its warm glow a small comfort against the encroaching darkness. The night seemed endless, filled with whispered fears and the unspoken knowledge that something terrible was waiting just beyond the door. And as they kept their vigil, the forest watched back, its secrets deepening, its mysteries growing more insidious with every passing hour. The village had always lived in the shadow of the forest's secrets, but recent events had turned that shadow into an oppressive weight. Anomalies, once whispered about as legends, had become a terrifying reality. The appearance of glowing orbs and otherworldly phenomena had everyone on edge, a palpable fear that lingered in the air like a fog. Potapike's house was no longer just a home, it had become a refuge from the inexplicable horrors outside. The small group huddled inside, seeking comfort in numbers and the fragile safety of four walls. The old man was a bastion of calm, but even he couldn't hide the tension in his eyes as he prepared for whatever might come next. The night before, the village had witnessed a spectacle that chilled them to their cores. A pulsating, misty cloud had formed over the rotten forest, accompanied by an insistent buzzing that seemed to crawl under the skin, making every hair stand on end. The sound was omnipresent, seeping into their bones and minds, creating an overwhelming sense of dread. Then, from the eerie buzz, a glowing orb had emerged, its bluish light casting an unnatural glow over the trees. The orb was the size of a football, yet it carried with it an immense sense of menace. Potapike and Dinis had instinctively sought shelter, hiding under the sturdy kitchen table. As the old man whispered fervent prayers, the author had kept watch, heart pounding, every instinct screaming that something was very, very wrong. These glowing spheres were not just harmless lights. The villagers had learned through grim experience that staring at them too long could have dire consequences. There was a story about Kolia, who had been mesmerized by one such orb. He had been lifted off the ground, his body contorted in ways that defied nature, before being sucked into the light and disappearing without a trace. When Kolia returned 2 days later, it was clear he was not the same. His eyes were vacant, his movements robotic, as if something had hollowed him out and left only a shell. The sight of him, a living ghost of what he once was, spread fear like wildfire through the village. It was a stark reminder that the anomalies were not just mysterious, they were deadly. Potapike often spoke of the old legends, stories of the forest swallowing people and cattle alike. These tales, once dismissed as superstitions, now felt like premonitions. The current events seemed like the continuation of those ancient curses, intensified by the strange figures and objects associated with the military presence. The forest was reclaiming its dark reputation with a vengeance. Every night, the villagers would hear strange noises. Humans and animals alike shivered at the sound of distant roars, the earth trembling beneath them. Lights flickered in unnatural patterns, and shadows moved where there should be none. People stayed indoors, barricading their windows and doors, and huddled in prayer. Even those who weren't particularly religious found themselves clutching crosses and whispering old hymns, hoping to ward off the malevolent forces they could not understand. In Potapike's house, the fear was almost tangible. Pashka's unexpected arrival had only heightened their sense of urgency. The author, rifle in hand, remained vigilant, eyes darting to every corner of the room. Dinas clung to Potapike, the boy's trust in his grandfather a small beacon of hope. "We have to stay alert," Potapike said, his voice steady despite the underlying tension. "These anomalies are not random. They're part of something bigger, something we need to survive." The author nodded, gripping his rifle tighter. "We'll get through this, but we need to be smart. No unnecessary risks." As the night dragged on, the oppressive atmosphere grew thicker, the sense of impending doom ever present. Outside, the forest seemed alive with malicious intent, and the glowing orbs hovered like eyes, watching, waiting. Inside, the villagers clung to their fragile sanctuary, each praying in their own way for the night to pass without further incident. But deep down, they all knew that the true danger was only just beginning, and surviving meant facing not just the forest's ancient curses, but also the unknown terror that now stalked their every move. Pashka's face was pale, his eyes wide with the lingering fear of what he had witnessed. As he warmed his hands by the fire, the room's dim light flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Potapike and the author sat close, leaning in to catch every word of Pashka's harrowing tale. "I was out by the rotten forest," Pashka began, his voice trembling slightly. "You know, near where those strange occurrences have been happening. I had my rifle with me, just in case. The forest has always been eerie, but lately it's been downright terrifying." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I was following a game trail when I saw them. A group of people in strange suits like those old cosmonaut outfits you see in the pictures. They were moving cautiously, almost like they were afraid of being seen. I hid behind a fallen tree and watched." Potapike's eyes narrowed, and he exchanged a worried glance with the author. The mention of the cosmonauts was enough to send chills down their spines. "They were setting up some kind of equipment," Pashka went on. "Devices that looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie. I couldn't understand what they were doing, but it felt wrong, unnatural. And then it happened." Pashka's voice dropped to a whisper. The air grew thick with a strange energy. There was this low hum, barely audible at first, but it kept getting louder. The ground started to vibrate, and the hum turned into a powerful buzzing, like a swarm of giant insects. It was unbearable. The author felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He could almost hear the ominous buzzing in his mind, the way Pashka described it so vividly. And then, from the mist, an anomaly appeared, Pashka said, his eyes wide with remembered horror. A pulsating, glowing orb, like a living thing. The cosmonauts didn't see it at first, but when they did, it was too late. The orb emitted a blinding light, and the buzzing grew so loud it felt like my head would explode. He swallowed hard, his voice shaking. The anomaly lifted the cosmonauts off the ground. They struggled, but it was useless. They were held in the air, their bodies contorting unnaturally. The light from the orb seemed to envelop them, and then they just vanished, disappeared into thin air. Potapike crossed himself, his lips moving in a silent prayer. The author felt a chill run down his spine. The room seemed to grow colder, the fire's warmth unable to chase away the creeping dread. "I waited until the buzzing stopped and the anomaly vanished before I dared to move," Pashka said. "When I finally got up, there was nothing left. Just the abandoned equipment and a sense of something profoundly wrong." The author took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "We need to be careful," he said, his voice firm. "These anomalies are more dangerous than we thought. We can't let our guard down." Potapike nodded, his face grim. "We must protect ourselves and the village. These cosmonauts, whatever they're doing, they're not here to help us. We need to stay vigilant and be prepared for anything." As the night wore on, Pashka's story hung heavy in the air. The villagers knew they were facing something beyond their understanding, something that threatened their very existence. The glowing orbs, the strange figures, and the ominous anomalies were just the beginning of a nightmare from which there was no waking. They sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. Outside, the forest seemed to watch and wait, its dark secrets ready to unfold. And inside, they prepared for the long, uncertain night ahead, knowing that their survival depended on their unity and their unwavering vigilance against the creeping terror that surrounded them. Pashka's hands trembled as he continued his harrowing account, the flickering firelight casting ominous shadows across his face. Potapik and the author leaned in closer, their expressions tense, fully aware of the gravity of Pashka's words. The anomaly didn't just lift the cosmonauts into the air, Pashka said, his voice barely above a whisper. It held them there, suspended like rag dolls. They were utterly powerless, their limbs flailing helplessly. And then, with a force that seemed to come from the very bowels of the earth, the anomaly hurled them back down. The room grew colder, the silence thick with dread. Potapik's face was pale, his eyes reflecting the terror in Pashka's story. They hit the ground with a sickening thud, Pashka continued, his voice cracking. I could hear their bones breaking, the air knocked out of their lungs. It was like watching a giant hand crush them, discarding them like broken toys. The impact was so severe, I doubt any of them survived. If they did, they wouldn't have been recognizable. The author felt a chill run down his spine, the vivid description painting a gruesome picture in his mind. He could almost hear the crunch of bones, the muffled cries of pain, and the eerie silence that followed. The worst part, Pashka said, his voice dropping to a haunted whisper, was the sheer randomness of it. The anomaly seemed almost sentient, as if it chose its victims deliberately, playing with them before delivering the fatal blow. 1 minute they were there, performing their mysterious tasks, and the next, they were lifeless heaps on the forest floor. Potapik crossed himself, murmuring a prayer under his breath. The author could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear that gnawed at his own gut. These anomalies are more than just dangerous, the author said, his voice shaking. They're lethal. We need to stay far away from them, no matter what. Pashka nodded, his face etched with the memory of what he had witnessed. The cosmonauts thought they could control these forces, understand them. But they were wrong. Whatever this is, it's beyond human comprehension, and it doesn't care about us. It's like a force of nature, indiscriminate and merciless. Potapik's eyes darkened with resolve. We have to warn the others, he said. Make sure everyone in the village knows the danger. No one goes near the forest alone, and everyone stays inside after dark. The author agreed, his mind racing with plans to fortify their homes, gather supplies, and prepare for the worst. The anomalies were unpredictable and deadly, and they couldn't afford to be caught off guard. As the night deepened, the weight of Pashka's tale settled over them like a suffocating blanket. The forest outside seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, the shadows lengthening and twisting in the firelight. The villagers knew that their survival depended on their unity, vigilance, and the hope that they could withstand the terror lurking just beyond their doorsteps. They sat in silence, the crackling of the fire, the only sound in the oppressive stillness. Each of them felt the creeping dread, the sense that they were up against something far beyond their understanding, something that could snuff out their lives in an instant. And as they prepared for the long, uncertain night ahead, they clung to the fragile hope that dawn would bring some respite from the nightmare that had engulfed their once peaceful village. Pashka's voice quivered as he recounted the harrowing experience, his eyes darting nervously around the room, as if expecting the anomaly itself to materialize before him. It was like being caught in a whirlwind of chaos, Pashka began, his words shaky yet vivid. One moment I was cautiously observing those cosmonauts in their strange suits, and the next, I was airborne, lifted off the ground as if by invisible hands. The force was overwhelming, crushing, and utterly beyond comprehension. Potapik and the author listened intently, their hearts heavy with the weight of Pashka's ordeal. I felt weightless, helpless, Pashka continued, his hands trembling visibly. And then, just as suddenly, I was plummeting down, crashing onto the forest floor with bone-jarring impact. The pain was excruciating, but worse was the realization of what these anomalies could do. Potapik crossed himself silently, his face drawn with concern. How did you survive, he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Pashka shook his head slowly. I don't know, he admitted. It was as if the anomaly toyed with me, testing its power, before letting me go. Others weren't so lucky. The room fell into a heavy silence as Pashka's words hung in the air, the flickering candlelight casting eerie shadows on the walls. And that's not all, Pashka continued after a moment, his voice tinged with dread. There were times when the forest itself seemed to twist and warp. I witnessed sudden darkness engulfing the clearing, followed by columns of eerie, pulsating light that appeared out of nowhere. Time seemed to bend and stretch, as if reality itself was being torn apart. Potapike's expression darkened further, his fingers tracing the sign of the cross on his chest. The author's mind raced with the implications of what Pashka described anomalies that not only defied logic but threatened the very fabric of their existence. These anomalies, Pashka concluded, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and disbelief, they're not just anomalies, they're like breaches in reality, tearing through the veil of our world, and we're at their mercy. The author swallowed hard, his thoughts racing with the implications of Pashka's account. The village was not just facing a series of strange occurrences, they were grappling with forces that defied understanding, forces that could reshape their lives in unimaginable ways. As they sat in the dimly lit room, the howling wind outside seemed to echo Pashka's fears, carrying with it a sense of foreboding that chilled them to the bone. They knew now that their struggle was not just against the unknown, but against something far more sinister, something that lurked within the depths of the decaying forest, waiting to unleash its unfathomable power once more. The glow of the eerie orbs materializing out of thin air cast an otherworldly hue upon the night, their presence signaling an imminent threat that sent shivers down the spines of the village folk. Pashka's narrow escape from their sinister grasp, hiding desperately in a shallow grave among the cemetery tombs, underscored the deadly menace these anomalies posed. It was as if the very air around me pulsed with a malevolent energy, Pashka recounted, his voice hushed yet filled with the urgency of his experience. I saw them descending from above, glowing spheres of light hovering ominously, their movements erratic and unpredictable. One wrong move, one glimpse too long, and I knew I would be at their mercy. Potapike and the others listened intently, their faces etched with concern as Pashka described the harrowing encounter. I clung to the shadows, my heart pounding in my chest, Pashka continued, his hands trembling slightly as he gestured to emphasize the gravity of his words. The cemetery offered me refuge, its silent stones and crumbling graves becoming my shield against those unearthly entities. I dared not even breathe, fearing that the slightest sound would betray my presence to those malevolent spheres. As he spoke, a cold draft seemed to sweep through the room, chilling them to their core. The author imagined the scene vividly, Pashka crouched in the darkness, surrounded by the silent markers of the dead, while above the orbs pulsed with an intensity that defied natural explanation. These orbs, Pashka whispered, his eyes darting nervously around the room, they aren't just lights. They're something else, something that defies reason and threatens us all. Potapike crossed himself silently, a gesture of supplication against the unknown forces that encroached upon their village. The author felt a chill run down his spine as he considered the implications of Pashka's tale, not just isolated incidents of strange phenomena, but a pervasive threat that seemed intent on encroaching further into their lives. The cemetery saved me, Pashka concluded, his voice barely above a whisper, but others may not be so fortunate. We must be vigilant, wary of the skies and the shadows they cast. These orbs, they're a warning of something much darker lurking beyond our understanding. The room fell silent, the weight of Pashka's words hanging heavily in the air. Outside, the night pressed in with an oppressive stillness, the village seemingly held in the grip of an unseen fear. They knew then that their struggle was not just against a physical threat, but against an enigma that defied logic, an enigma that threatened to consume them all in its unfathomable grasp. The news struck the village like a thunderbolt on a clear day. The anomaly had claimed the lives of an entire squad of soldiers, around 24 men who ventured into the depths of the forest. Pashka's account painted a grim picture of the events that unfolded, revealing the chilling scale and severity of the ongoing anomalies. They were armed, trained, Pashka recounted, his voice trembling slightly as he spoke. But none of that mattered when the anomaly struck. It descended upon them like a wrathful force of nature, unseen and unstoppable. The villagers gathered around, their faces etched with disbelief and horror as Pashka continued his tale. The soldiers, he explained, had been dispatched to investigate the strange occurrences that plagued the forest, the glowing orbs, the pulsating mists, the unsettling distortions of time and space. They never stood a chance, Pashka whispered, his gaze fixed on the flickering candlelight. The anomaly engulfed them, twisted them, and cast them aside like discarded puppets. Their weapons useless, their training futile in the face of such unearthly power. Potapike crossed himself silently, a gesture of mourning for the fallen soldiers who had ventured into the unknown in service to their country, only to meet a fate beyond comprehension. They were brave men, Pashka acknowledged solemnly, but bravery counts for little against forces that defy all reason and logic. As Pashka's words hung in the air, the weight of the loss settled upon the village like a shroud. The soldiers had been their protectors, their guardians against the encroaching darkness that now seemed to envelop them all. The forest, Pashka concluded, his voice barely a whisper, it hides secrets that we cannot begin to fathom. Secrets that have claimed the lives of our bravest, and may yet claim more. The villagers nodded somberly, their minds racing with fear and uncertainty. The anomaly was no longer just a curiosity or a passing threat, it was a harrowing reality that had exacted a devastating toll. As they retreated to their homes that night, the darkness outside seemed deeper, the shadows more ominous, as if the forest itself held its breath in anticipation of what horrors lay concealed within its depths. After Pashka's chilling account of the horrors in the forest, Potapike and the other villagers found themselves thrust into a tense preparation for what seemed an imminent threat. Despite their meager arsenal, they gathered what weapons they could muster: old rifles, hunting knives, and makeshift clubs, underscoring their grim determination to defend themselves against the unknown menace lurking in the shadows. Night descended like a heavy blanket over the village, its usual tranquil silence pierced by the palpable unease that gripped every soul. As they huddled together in Potapike's modest home, the flickering lamplight cast eerie shadows across their faces, reflecting the fear and resolve etched in their expressions. Then, as if conjured from the darkest recesses of their fears, a grotesque figure emerged from the inky blackness outside. The figure of the Pyrokrut. A twisted, malformed being that folklore whispered of stood ominously, its presence a visceral manifestation of the lurking danger that haunted their every thought. The villagers watched in horror as the Pyrokrut loomed near, its misshapen silhouette outlined against the moonlit night. Even Karai, the village watchdog known for his stoic demeanor, sensed the impending threat. His growls reverberated through the air, a primal warning that echoed the fear pulsing through each villager's heart. Potapike, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped his rifle, exchanged wary glances with his neighbors. The Pyrokrut's presence was an unwelcome confirmation of their worst fears, that the anomalies in the forest had not only claimed lives but had perhaps spawned something even more sinister. The night seemed to stretch endlessly, each passing moment fraught with tension as the villagers kept vigil, their senses heightened to every rustle of leaves and creak of branches outside. The howling wind seemed to carry whispers of dread, as if nature itself recoiled from the malevolent force that had intruded upon their once peaceful existence. As dawn finally broke, casting a feeble light over the weary faces of the villagers, the Pyrokrut had vanished without a trace. Yet its chilling visitation left an indelible mark, deepening the shadow of fear that now enveloped the village. "We must stay vigilant," Potapike murmured, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and dread. "There's more out there than we can understand." The villagers nodded in grim agreement, their eyes fixed on the horizon where the forest loomed ominously, concealing secrets that threatened to unravel their very existence. The night had brought terror, but it had also hardened their resolve, for they knew that the true battle lay ahead, against forces that defied logic and reason, lurking just beyond the edge of their fragile sanctuary. The sudden appearance of the spectral figure in the midst of the Izba sent shockwaves through everyone present. It materialized silently, its form ethereal and indistinct, yet unmistakably malevolent. For a moment, the villagers stood frozen in disbelief, their minds struggling to comprehend the unearthly presence that defied rational explanation. Potapike, ever the stalwart, was the first to recover from the initial shock. His instincts, honed by years of living close to the forest's edge, he reached for the crude weapon at his side, a weathered hunting knife, and squared off against the phantom intruder. His voice trembled slightly as he called out, demanding to know the spirit's purpose, but received only a chilling silence in response. The figure, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly intensity, moved with an unsettling grace. It circled Potapike slowly, as if studying him with a detached curiosity. The air thickened with tension, each heartbeat echoing loudly in the confined space of the Izba. Without warning, the apparition lunged at Potapike, its spectral form intertwining with his own. The clash was swift and brutal. The Izba filled with the sound of desperate struggles, furniture overturned in the melee, and the guttural cries of both combatants locked in a battle that transcended the physical realm. Pashka, drawn by the commotion, burst into the room just as the struggle reached its climax. Seeing Potapike at the mercy of the malevolent entity, he acted with instinctive courage. With a primal roar, he thrust his weapon, the sharp tines of a pitchfork, into the phantom's incorporeal form. The ghostly shriek that followed pierced the stillness of the night, reverberating in the minds of all who bore witness to the terrifying spectacle. The spectral figure convulsed violently before dissipating into a swirling mist of shadows, leaving behind an eerie silence that hung heavy in the air. The Izba, now a scene of chaos and carnage, bore witness to the toll exacted by the unseen forces that had breached their sanctuary. Amidst the overturned furniture and the lingering scent of fear, the villagers gathered around Potapike, whose body bore the marks of the otherworldly encounter. His face contorted in pain, blood seeping from wounds inflicted by the phantom's relentless assault. The gravity of their predicament settled upon them like a suffocating blanket, reminding them of the precariousness of their existence in the face of supernatural threats. As they tended to Potapike's injuries, the realization dawned upon them all their village was no longer sheltered from the malevolent forces that lurked in the darkness of the forest. The attack had left scars, not just on Potapike's body, but on their collective psyche, a testament to the ever-present danger that now encroached upon their once tranquil lives. "We must fortify ourselves," Pashka declared, his voice solemn, "for this is just the beginning of what lurks in the shadows." With weary eyes, they looked towards the forest beyond, where the trees stood sentinel over secrets that whispered of ancient terrors and unseen perils. The night had borne witness to their defiance, but they knew that their struggle against the unknown had only just begun. After the vicious attack by the Pyrokrut, Potapike's condition worsened rapidly. His body contorted and twisted, agonizing pain contorting his features as he writhed on the floor of the Izba. The villagers gathered around him, their faces etched with horror and helplessness, as they witnessed the transformation unfolding before their eyes. Potapike, once a robust and sturdy figure of the village, now bore the grotesque marks of the Pyrokrut's curse. In a voice strained with anguish, Potapike pleaded for someone to end his suffering before he became as monstrous as the Pyrokrut itself. His words hung heavy in the stifling air of the Izba, each syllable a stark reminder of the grim reality they faced. Pashka, his hands trembling from both fear and resolve, raised his weapon hesitantly. The weight of the decision pressed upon him, knowing that mercy in this instance meant delivering a fatal blow to his friend and protector. With a steady hand, he whispered a prayer under his breath and brought the weapon down swiftly, ending Potapike's torment with a single, decisive strike. The room fell into an eerie silence broken only by the sound of stifled sobs and the distant howling wind outside. The villagers stood in somber reverence, honoring Potapike's sacrifice and mourning the loss of their steadfast defender. As they grappled with the aftermath of the tragedy, a chilling realization dawned upon them: the Pyrokruts were not a singular aberration. The forest held more horrors yet to be revealed. Their vigil was abruptly interrupted by the arrival of another Pyrokrut, its form twisted and contorted in an unimaginable display of grotesquerie. Deniska, the youngest among them, recoiled in stark terror at the sight of the new intruder. His voice cracked with fear as he stumbled backward, seeking refuge behind the nearest sturdy object. The main protagonist, their leader in this grim ordeal, reacted with swift resolve. With a steady aim and a heart heavy with the weight of necessity, they raised their firearm and fired. The shot rang out through the Izba, shattering the tense silence and punctuating the confrontation with finality. The Pyrokrut's twisted form collapsed to the ground, its malevolent presence extinguished in a grotesque tableau of death. Yet, amidst the palpable relief of immediate danger, a chilling realization lingered: they were no longer mere witnesses to supernatural horrors. They had become warriors in a battle against forces beyond comprehension, where each victory exacted a toll measured not just in lives lost, but in innocence shattered and souls scarred by the relentless march of darkness. As they stood over the fallen Pyrokrut, the weight of their newfound role settled upon them like a heavy cloak. The night outside loomed dark and foreboding, whispering of more horrors lurking in the shadows of the Niloiles, where the line between reality and nightmare blurred into an indistinct abyss of fear and uncertainty. As the main protagonist directed Pashka to stand guard against further intrusions, they knelt beside Potapopak, whose contorted form writhed in agony on the dirt floor of the Esba. The scene was suffused with an aura of desperation, each moment tinged with the looming threat of the Pyrokruts lurking beyond. Potapak's suffering intensified with each passing second. The anomalous deformation gripped his body mercilessly, distorting his once strong limbs into grotesque shapes. His hand, now twisted beyond recognition, seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, a grim testament to the insidious nature of the Pyrokrut's curse. With grim determination etched upon their face, the main protagonist fetched a crude blade, the only tool at hand that might serve to sever the source of the affliction. The decision weighed heavily upon them to amputate Potapak's ravaged hand, risking not only his physical well-being, but also his trust and friendship. As they steadied themselves for the grim task ahead, the air thickened with a potent mix of dread and resolve. Potapak's groans of pain echoed through the Izba, underscoring the gravity of their desperate gambit. With a steady hand and a heart heavy with reluctant acceptance, they positioned the blade against Potapak's wrist. The initial cut was met with a visceral resistance, as if the very essence of the Pyrokrut's curse fought to preserve its hold. The protagonists gritted their teeth against the overwhelming wave of revulsion that threatened to overwhelm them. Blood, dark and thick, pooled around Potapak's arm, a stark reminder of the sacrificial toll exacted by their struggle against the encroaching darkness. Finally, with a decisive stroke, the blade severed flesh from bone. Potapak's agonized cry pierced the stillness of the Izba, mingling with the grim determination etched upon their features. The tainted hand, now a detached reminder of the horrors they faced, lay motionless upon the floor, a macabre testament to their desperate bid for survival. As the immediate threat subsided and the night outside continued its relentless vigil, the main protagonist cradled Potapak in their arms, offering what comfort they could amidst the ruins of shattered lives and fractured spirits. The Izba bore witness to their silent vows, forged in blood and sacrifice, to stand firm against the encroaching tide of malevolence that threatened to engulf them all. Through the haze of exhaustion and grief, they glimpsed a faint glimmer of hope, a fragile ember amidst the encroaching darkness, a testament to their resilience in the face of unimaginable terror. The night pressed in around them, but they stood resolute, their bond strengthened by the crucible of fear and suffering they had endured together. As Pashka tirelessly defended the homestead, fending off wave after wave of Pyrokruts with precise shots from his weathered rifle, the main protagonist grappled with a chilling realization. Amidst the chaos and carnage, it became apparent that the Pyrokrut who had attacked Potapakos was not merely a malevolent creature, but once a child. This haunting revelation struck deep, piercing through the veil of fear and uncertainty that shrouded their desperate struggle. The Pyrokruts, grotesque and deformed, were not born of pure malice alone. They were twisted manifestations of innocent lives, corrupted and contorted by the unyielding grip of the anomaly that gripped the decaying forest. The protagonist's heart sank as they comprehended the indiscriminate nature of the anomaly's wrath, sparing neither age nor innocence in its relentless pursuit of suffering and deformity. Each Pyrokrut that fell under Pashka's steady aim bore witness to the tragedy of lives cut short and futures irreparably altered. The echoes of gunfire reverberated through the night air, punctuated by the anguished cries of those whose humanity had been cruelly stripped away. Yet, amidst the grim tableau of death and despair, Pashka's courage shone brightly, a beacon of defiance against the encroaching darkness. In the flickering light of the kerosene lamp, the main protagonist wrestled with their own turmoil. They saw in each fallen Pyrokrut the ghostly visage of what once was a child, perhaps innocent and unknowing, now transformed into a harbinger of terror. The lines between victim and assailant blurred, obscured by the relentless onslaught that threatened to consume them all. The revelation underscored the fragility of their existence in the face of forces beyond comprehension or mercy. As they surveyed the battlefield strewn with twisted bodies and shattered hopes, a grim determination settled over them. They knew now, more than ever, that their fight was not just for survival, but for understanding and redemption in a world haunted by the malevolent whispers of the anomaly. With each passing moment, as Pashka continued his vigil against the encroaching tide of Pyrocruts, the protagonist grappled with the burden of knowledge that innocence had been sacrificed upon the altar of primal fear and inexorable fate. Yet, amidst the desolation and despair, they found solace in the resilience of the human spirit, forged in the crucible of adversity and illuminated by the flickering embers of hope that refused to be extinguished. Together, they stood against the relentless onslaught, their resolve tempered by the bitter truth that even in the darkest of nights, amidst the horrors of the Pyrocruts, humanity's capacity for courage and compassion endured. As dawn broke over the ravaged homestead, casting feeble rays of light through the dusty windows of the Izba, a heavy pall of sorrow and guilt hung over the main protagonist. They stood amidst the aftermath of the night's harrowing events, where the air still carried echoes of gunfire and the lingering stench of death. Deniska, the young boy who had sought refuge in the Izba, sat huddled in a corner, his young mind reeling from the devastating realization that one of the slain Pyrocruts had once been his mother. The revelation struck him like a thunderbolt, shattering his innocence and plunging him into a profound well of grief and emotional turmoil. The image of his mother's distorted form, twisted by the anomaly into a grotesque parody of her former self, haunted his thoughts and weighed heavily on his fragile heart. Meanwhile, the main protagonist moved with solemn determination, covering the lifeless bodies of the Pyrocruts with an old cloak. Each motion was laden with a mixture of reverence and anguish, a futile attempt to shield their conscience from the brutality of the night's deeds. The weight of responsibility pressed upon them heavily, knowing that each fallen Pyrocrut had once been someone's loved one, someone's child now lost to the inscrutable forces of the anomaly. Potapike, though grievously wounded and barely clinging to consciousness, showed faint signs of life. His resilience in the face of overwhelming adversity was a testament to the indomitable spirit of the villagers, who had endured horrors beyond imagination throughout the night. The Izba, once a haven of warmth and security, now bore witness to the scars of battle and the indelible marks left by fear and despair. Outside, the first hints of daylight painted the sky with hues of soft orange and pink, casting a gentle glow upon the rugged landscape. The forest, silent now but still ominous in its decay, stood as a silent witness to the tumultuous events that had unfolded within its shadowy depths. The morning brought a fragile sense of calm, yet it offered no solace to those who had witnessed the horrors of the night. Amidst the solemnity of the dawn, the main protagonist's thoughts turned to the future. They knew that the threat posed by the anomaly and its twisted creations remained ever present, lurking beyond the edges of their fragile sanctuary. As they stood vigil over the fallen, grappling with their own doubts and fears, a resolve began to crystallize within them, a resolve to protect what remained of their community, to confront the darkness that threatened to engulf them all. In the quietude of the early morning, with the Izba shrouded in a melancholy stillness, they awaited the uncertain path that lay ahead. Each heartbeat echoed with the weight of their shared burden, each breath drawn a testament to their unyielding determination to persevere in the face of unimaginable adversity. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the village, they knew that the night's horrors were not yet over, for the anomaly held secrets darker and more sinister than they could possibly imagine. As Potapike lay on the brink of death, a pall of inevitability hung heavy in the air of the Izba. His once robust frame now appeared fragile and ravaged, a stark testament to the merciless toll exacted by the Pyrocrut attack. In his fading moments of lucidity, he grasped the main protagonist's hand with a feeble strength, his eyes reflecting both resignation and a flicker of fear. "Take care of Deniska." Potapike's voice was a hoarse whisper, barely audible amidst the hushed atmosphere of the room. He's just a boy. He doesn't deserve any of this." The main protagonist nodded solemnly, their heart heavy with the weight of impending loss. They had come to rely on Potapike's steadfast guidance and unwavering courage throughout the ordeal, and now faced the grim reality of his imminent passing. Yet Potapike's concerns transcended mere mortality. With a tremor in his voice, he broached a darker apprehension that gripped his thoughts. "I fear, after I'm gone, I might turn." Like them, Potapike's words stumbled, choked by the anguish of his realization. Like that child, who became one of them. "Please, promise me, if it comes to that. End it quickly." The main protagonist recoiled inwardly at the bleakness of Potapike's request, yet understood the gravity of his fears. The transformation into a Pyrokrut was not just a physical metamorphosis, but a harrowing descent into a state of inhumanity and grotesque deformation. The thought that such a fate might await Potapike after death was a chilling reminder of the anomaly's insidious reach. As the Esba descended into a silence punctuated only by the shallow breaths of the dying and the distant murmurs of the waking village, the main protagonist grappled with the grim possibility that Potapike's concerns held truth. The anomaly, with its unpredictable and malevolent influence, had already claimed innocent lives and left behind twisted remnants of humanity. In the growing light of dawn, with each passing moment, the main protagonist's resolve solidified. They would honor Potapike's final wishes, not out of duty alone, but out of a shared understanding of the dire necessity to prevent the anomaly from claiming yet another victim. As they stood vigil by Potapike's side, their thoughts turned to Deniska, the young boy whose innocence had been shattered by the horrors of the night. They vowed silently to protect him, to shield him from the grim realities that now haunted their village. In the quiet of that solemn morning, amidst the echoes of tragedy and the specter of impending loss, they braced themselves for the challenges ahead. The anomaly had revealed its malevolent power in ways that defied comprehension, yet they remained steadfast in their determination to confront it, to protect their community and preserve what remained of their humanity in the face of unspeakable darkness. As the first light of dawn filtered through the darkened clouds, a somber stillness settled over the village. The night had been a tumultuous symphony of fear and loss, now juxtaposed against the serene chorus of awakening birdsong. Outside, amidst the gnarled trees and unkempt underbrush of the Niloi forest, lay the grotesque remnants of the Pyrokruts. Paired with the eerie calm of the morning, Pashka and Deniska found themselves in a surreal tableau, surrounded by the twisted bodies that once housed their neighbors and loved ones. Each lifeless form bore the marks of an otherworldly transformation, a reminder of the horrors that had unfolded just hours before. Deniska, with eyes still raw from grief and disbelief, stood near the body that had once been his mother. The recognition of her twisted form had shattered his innocence, casting him into a world where childhood fears mingled with the stark reality of death. Pashka, his weathered face etched with exhaustion and sorrow, stood silently beside him, a solemn sentinel amidst the devastation. The main protagonist, their heart heavy with the weight of responsibility, knew that the grim task ahead demanded reverence and resolve. With a quiet determination, they proposed a plan to bury the Pyrokruts, to offer them a final semblance of dignity in death. It was a gesture not only to honor the fallen, but to ease the collective anguish that gripped the village. Together, with shovels in hand, Pashka and the main protagonist began to dig. The earth yielded reluctantly, as if reluctant to accept the burden of these twisted souls. Deniska, too young to fully grasp the enormity of the task, watched with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, his small frame a stark contrast to the grim tableau before him. As they worked, the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the makeshift gravesite. Each shovel of dirt brought them closer to closure, yet the memories of the night's horrors lingered like a spectral presence in the air. With the last Pyrokrut laid to rest, a solemn silence descended over the trio. The main protagonist, wiping sweat and dirt from their brow, exchanged a wordless glance with Pashka and a comforting nod to Deniska. The act of burial had not only marked the end of a nightmarish chapter, but had bound them together in a shared resolve to confront the darkness that loomed over their village. As they stood by the freshly turned earth, the main protagonist whispered a silent prayer for peace and protection, for themselves and for the village. In the face of unfathomable adversity, they found strength in unity and solace in the bond forged through tragedy. The cacophony of a dog's frantic barking shattered the fragile morning tranquility, echoing through the village like a harbinger of impending doom. Karoy's relentless alarm reverberated against the backdrop of Deniska's inconsolable cries, a symphony of fear that pierced the hearts of those who remained. The main protagonist and Pashka, their senses heightened by instinct and dread, raced back towards the house. Each hurried step carried an unspoken urgency, fueled by the unsettling feeling that another sinister force was at play. Arriving at the scene, their worst fears were realized in the form of Potapotapike, who lay on the bench, his body contorting in grotesque metamorphosis. The air around him seemed to shimmer with an unearthly aura, a haunting testament to the unseen malevolence that gripped their village. Potapike's last moments were a tableau of agony and transformation, his features twisting into an unfamiliar semblance under the influence of the anomaly's cruel embrace. His piercing cries of torment mingled with the helpless gasps of those who bore witness, a chilling reminder of the relentless and indiscriminate nature of the unfolding horrors. Deniska, overwhelmed by grief and terror, clung to the main protagonist's side, his young eyes wide with incomprehension. Pashka, hardened by years of survival in the unforgiving wilderness, stood nearby with clenched fists, his weathered face etched with sorrow and rage. As Potapike's life ebbed away, so too did the fragile semblance of normalcy that had briefly returned with the dawn. The main protagonist, grappling with a mixture of despair and determination, vowed silently to uncover the truth behind the anomalies that had ravaged their community. In the wake of Potapike's tragic demise, a solemn pall settled over the small gathering. The ominous silence that followed spoke volumes of the uncertainty and fear that now permeated their once peaceful village. With heavy hearts and resolute minds, they braced themselves for the next chapter in their harrowing journey, knowing that the shadows of darkness loomed ever closer. In a desperate bid to stave off the looming horror of Potapike's transformation into a perverted creature, the main protagonist's hands trembled as they gripped the firearm. The weight of the decision bore down heavily upon their conscience, each heartbeat echoing the moral turmoil within. Potapike, once a pillar of their small community, now lay before them, his body contorting in unnatural ways as the anomaly's cruel touch twisted his form. The air crackled with an eerie energy, a testament to the malevolent forces that had invaded their tranquil existence. The main protagonist hesitated for a fleeting moment, their gaze locked with Potapike's agonized visage. Memories of shared moments and the warmth of friendship clashed violently with the stark reality of the present. Deniska's plaintive whimper in the background pierced their resolve, a haunting reminder of the innocence at stake. With a heavy heart and a prayer whispered into the void, they squeezed the trigger. The gunshot shattered the morning calm, echoing through the stillness like a mournful lament. Potapike's body convulsed briefly, then fell still, his eyes forever closed to the horrors that had befallen him. The aftermath was a tableau of sorrow and grim determination. Deniska, trembling with fear and grief, clung to the protagonist, seeking solace in their somber embrace. Pashka, his weathered countenance betraying no emotion, stood sentinel over the fallen friend, a silent testament to the harsh realities of survival in a world teetering on the edge of oblivion. As the echoes of the gunshot faded into the ether, a profound silence settled over the small gathering. The weight of their actions hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder of the sacrifices demanded by the relentless onslaught of the unknown. In the midst of tragedy and despair, the main protagonist vowed silently to uncover the truth behind the anomalies that had ravaged their once peaceful village. Their resolve hardened with each passing moment, fueled by the memory of Potapike's ultimate sacrifice, a sacrifice made to protect the fragile remnants of humanity from the encroaching darkness. Thus, amidst the shadows of grief and uncertainty, they embarked on a journey fraught with peril and revelation, driven by the unshakable conviction that in the face of relentless terror, courage and determination were their only allies. The gunshot shattered the fragile peace that lingered in the room, its reverberations echoing through the morning air like a portent of doom. The window pane exploded into a shower of glass shards, scattering remnants of safety across the floor. In the stunned aftermath, Deniska's cries pierced the silence, a raw expression of fear and confusion that mirrored the turmoil within. For a fleeting moment, time seemed suspended, each breath drawn with hesitant urgency. The main protagonist's hands trembled, their heart heavy with the weight of the irreversible act they had just committed. Around them, Pashka stood stoic, his weathered face a mask of unreadable emotion, while the lingering scent of gunpowder mingled with the scent of death and decay. The reality of Potapyk's fate hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder of the relentless march of the anomalies that had besieged their village. Amidst the chaos, Deniska's sudden disappearance went unnoticed, a cruel twist in an already twisted tale. Hours passed in a haze of mourning and regret, the community grappling with the aftermath of their collective trauma. It was amidst the somber ritual of burying the perverted bodies of the once human creatures that Deniska's return unfolded a chilling tableau of inexplicable horror. There, on the outskirts of the makeshift graveyard, Deniska emerged, his movements jerky and unnatural. His eyes, once filled with innocent wonder, now reflected a hollow vacancy, devoid of the spark that once defined him. The eerie silence that enveloped his presence spoke volumes, a foreboding omen of the new threat lurking within. The villagers recoiled in fear and disbelief, their hearts gripped by a cold dread as they beheld this spectral apparition. Whispers of forbidden possibilities, the insidious influence of the anomalies, the contagion that defied all logic rippled through their ranks like a wave of despair. As Deniska advanced, oblivious to their horror, a chilling realization took hold: the anomalies had not yet finished exacting their toll. What lay ahead was a harrowing journey into the heart of darkness, where each step forward threatened to unravel the fabric of their fragile existence. And so, amidst the remnants of shattered illusions and the specter of looming peril, the main protagonists steeled themselves for the trials that awaited. For in the eerie twilight of uncertainty, where reality bled into nightmare, courage would be their only shield against the encroaching darkness. Amidst the grim aftermath of Potapyk's death and Deniska's unsettling return as a perverted creature, the main protagonists found themselves grappling with despair and an urgent need for resilience. The air hung heavy with the stench of gunpowder and decay, a tangible reminder of the horrors that had unfolded in their midst. In the quiet lull that followed the chaos, they gathered in a circle, their faces etched with sorrow and resolve. Pashka, the seasoned hunter, spoke first, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "We can't afford to lose ourselves to fear," he muttered, his eyes darting between the others. "We need a plan of pact to ensure our survival." The main protagonist, their heart heavy with guilt and apprehension, nodded solemnly. They understood the gravity of their situation, the creeping influence of the anomalies that had already claimed so much. "If any of us," they paused, struggling to voice the unspeakable truth, "if we show signs of turning, of becoming like them they finally managed, we promise to end it swiftly." Deniska, now a haunting presence among them, stood apart, his gaze distant yet unnervingly alert. The others exchanged uneasy glances, grappling with the moral implications of their agreement. In this world turned upside down by forces beyond their comprehension, survival had distilled into a stark, chilling imperative. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across their makeshift sanctuary, they clasped hands in a silent vow, a pact forged in the crucible of anguish and fear. Each understood the weight of their commitment to protect not only themselves but also each other from the insidious grasp of the anomalies. Through the long night that followed, punctuated by the mournful cries of the wind and the occasional rustle of unseen terrors, their resolve held firm. They steeled themselves against the encroaching darkness, finding solace in the fragile unity born of shared adversity. For in this desolate landscape, where hope flickered like a feeble flame against the encroaching night, their pact represented more than mere survival. It embodied the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unyielding horror. And as they stood vigil, bound by their pact and the unspoken promise of sacrifice, they dared to believe that even amidst the abyss, a glimmer of hope could yet endure.